Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto was a haki user in One Piece. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by Mightiest battle and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1. Naruto POV 6 years after the Kyuubi attack. Get back here, you damn demon. Give me my son back. You killed my wife. I rounded the alley and tried to pick the pace up. I felt blood running down my head. I felt the bruises on my sides and my arms I got before I got away. I heard the yelling of the villagers getting a little farther away as I turned again and stopped seeing a wall with a half-broken ladder. I looked around, trying to find something or somewhere to hide. Kid. You're light enough to get up the ladder. I didn't care where the voice came from as I ran over to the broken ladder. I started it as the villagers came around the corner. Get down here. The ladder got jerked around and I held tight to the side of the ladder before I heard the metal snap. I looked back down and saw the ladder had broken. It fell back into the crowd and I sighed before I started up again. Kid, you got real lucky. I sighed and then started to walk along the rooftop. Why is it always like this on my birthday? I stopped at the roof's edge and looked over, seeing that the ground was too far and I couldn't reach the other roof. Hey, kid, why were they chasing you? I looked back and stopped seeing a man sitting in the shadow of another building. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could tell he was looking right at me. I don't know. They do this on my birthday every year. He hummed as he looked at me. Then, he lifted his arm and he had a bottle in his hand. He took a long drink from the bottle and sighed before he threw it over the side of the building. I heard it break and a man scream. What is your name, kid? Then Naruto Uzumaki. He shot up and I saw he was huge. He was bigger than anyone I'd ever seen. You're Naruto Uzumaki. I jumped, scared, as I looked up at him. Why ya? He walked out of the shadows. He was tanned with dark red hair with a little gray on the top. He had on a long, sleeveless, high-collared black cape. Under that, he had on a white shirt half buttoned up, exposing the middle of his chest and some abs like shinobi. He wore a set baggier pair of pants with a green-yellow indiscernible floral pattern halfway up the shin. The pair was a slightly loose plain brown one with golden buttons down the outer leg sides and a red sash around his waist to keep his shirt tucked inside. But his eyes were so strange. They had a small black dot in the center with a black ring around the center. And he had 3 scars going down his left eye. Naruto, how old are you? He moved closer and I saw he only had 1 arm. 6, why? He made a fist and clenched his teeth before looking to the Hokage's tower. I see, just you wait, Hiruzen. He growled out Jiji's name and I felt something go by me, a chill ran through me. He sighed before he unclenched his fist before he looked back at me with a smile. Well Naruto, I think I can tell you something that will make you happy. I blinked as I looked at him. What is that? He smiled as he walked over and knelt to be level with me. My name is Shanks Uzumaki, former head elder of Uzushiogakure. I may be your grandfather and we're going to see the Hokage. Council room POV 10 minutes later. Hiruzen sat in his seat listening to the elders trying to get him to allow them access to the Namikaze fortunes. As he was about to tell them no again, a power he hadn't felt in decades filled the air. Danzo and the elders and Hiruzen himself jumped up knowing only one man who knew the secrets of that power. Hiruzen. Hiruzen looked over at Homura as he shook with fear. Anbu. The dozen Anbu appeared in the council room and bowed to their Hokage. Lock down the village of beast far worse than the Kyuubi is knee. The council room door was blown in with the 4 Anbu guarding the room flying in with the doors. The Anbu crashed into the walls behind the elders, making them fall to the ground out of fear. Dust floated in the air as a figure slowly started to walk onto the wooden floor and the walls made an echo as the figure walked in a sword sheath tapping the ground as he walked. The Nuchknin and Takubetsujinin and a few Anbu in the room started falling to the floor. Long time no see, Hiruzen. I've come for answers. A man in a long black cape walked through the dust with a blond boy being held in his one arm. He stopped in the center of the room and Hiruzen finally saw that it was a sleeping Naruto being held by the arm of the former elder of Uzushiogakure. The clan heads looked at the man, all of them seemed to shake at the sight of the man. LL Lord Hokage, who is this man? Tsume asked as she looked up at the huge alpha of an elderly man. Shanks looked over at her and she shut her mouth as he glared at her. Sit down and be quiet before I sit you down. Tsume, normally the most feral woman of Konoha, is looking like a whipped puppy. Shanks looked back at Hiruzen. The glare Shanks leveled at Hiruzen could make a man's soul shake. I want to know what happened to my daughter Hiruzen. Where is Kushina and her husband Minato? Hiruzen turned ghostly white as he looked at the most powerful Uzumaki he'd ever known. All the clan heads looked at the man and then back at Hiruzen. Lord Hokage, what is he talking about? Danzo spoke before Hiruzen could. The Crimson Beast of Uzushiogakure, the last user of an ancient bloodline of the Uzumaki clan. Shock filled the room as they looked at Naruto as held onto the man's cape. Forget that for now, I want to know if this boy is my grandson. A vein appeared on his head as he looked at Hiruzen. And who am I going to kill for letting the villagers attack him every kami damn day? The floor around him shattered at his yell, the window blew out and the Anbu who'd surrounded him all passed out from the power he let loose. The civilian council members who were too scared to speak passed out as well. The ninja council nearly passed out from his power. Lord Shanks, I'm sorry, but I can't tell you th. Hiruzen, if you don't answer my questions I'll destroy the security seal barrier around the village. And as the former elder of Uzushiogakure, I will take all the seals and scrolls my daughter brought from our homeland. Hiruzen shrank back as he looked at one of the few men he feared. She and Minato are dead, Shanks, and yes, Naruto is your grandson. But, you have to let me explain. Hiruzen tried to retake control, but stopped as he looked into Shanks' eyes. I see, well, my grandson has told me everything on the way here. He wanted to be a shinobi. As for explanation, I could care less. You will have someone to take me to my daughter's home. I know you knew my daughter was a seal master as well, it's still standing. After that and the beating you all have coming I will start his training myself. But. Shanks looked over at Danzo, making him freeze. The old warhawk was no fool. He knew that even if he used his root and Shisui Sharingan, he'd only just hold the man off. All of Konoha's ninjas knew the Sharingan was useless against a seal master. I know all about that beast, I can sense it, you old bastard. My grandson will not be made into a damn weapon or keep being a kami damn punching bag. As of this moment anyone who so much as touches him without his okayed eyes. Danzo sweated as he looked at the man he knew could tear the village apart if he wanted to. Oh, I also noticed something when I saw him running from them. Some of your shinobi were in the crowd. If I see that again, well, you can guess right. Everyone nodded before a dog masked Anub appeared beside Hiruzen. Lord Hokage, a group of 40 ninjas were found dead right outside of the tower. A second later the dog mask Anbu was slammed with the same power everyone else was. He didn't pass out but was brought to the ground. I guess that one has a bit of willpower. To withstand my weak haki is impressive. He'll do for a guide. We'll be waiting outside, oh, and I will be coming as I have about 90% or so of the valuables from our old home. I'll be coming to exchange it for the ryo it's worth. My grandson is done digging through trash for food and clothes. Hiruzen nodded, knowing he'd lost his chance to get a word in. Naruto's POV 2 days later. Gramps, this is incredible. I looked back at my grandfather and saw him sitting on the porch of our new house. A smile on his face. That's nice, Naruto, don't forget we're going to get you more clothes later, as well as training gear and a few swords. I'll be teaching you the Crimson Beast style of swordsmanship I use. Really, Gramps? He smiled wide and nodded as he stood up and looked over to the gate. I looked over and saw the girl I helped when she was being bullied. I heard my grandfather laugh before he spoke up. Little miss, you're free to come onto the grounds, I'm sure my grandson would love the company. She epped before slowly coming out from behind the stone gate. HHHLO, LLL Lord S. Janka and N Naruto K-kun. I smiled, then ran up to her and grabbed her hand. Well, you heard Gramps. Let's go play. We have a small stream and pond around back we can play in. I turned and started to pull her to the small forest behind the house. Then Naruto-kun. I laughed as we ran through the trees. I smiled as we came up on the small clearing with the stream feeding into the pond. I looked at the flowers around the pond with a few rabbits on the other side of the pond. DT, this eye is a pretty place, and Naruto-kun. I smiled and I let her hand go before I ran over to the stream and pulled my sandals off and rolled my pants legs up. I jumped into the water. I smiled, loving the cool feeling of the water. I heard some splashing behind me and I turned around and saw Hinata smiling at me. I grabbed her and pulled her up to the edge of the pond. I reached in and grabbed a few of the flat stones. Then Naruto-kun, WW, what are we doing? I smiled and pulled one of the smaller rocks out. I got into the stance Gramps showed me for shuriken throwing. Gramps has started teaching me to throw shuriken and said he'd teach something to help me learn faster later today. That's nice. I laughed and threw it as hard as I could. It skipped 2 times before it splashed into the pond. Hinata took a stone from my hand and then did the same as me. She got 3 skips over the water before it splashed into the pond. Shanks POV. I laughed as I watched Naruto drag the poor red-faced girl off into the small woods behind the house. I nodded my head before I sat back down. I know you 6 are there, come on out. A second later Hiruzen and 5 more Anbu appeared at the gate. I smiled as I looked at him. Hello, Shanks. I hope you know the hell you've thrown the village into. Forcing the announcement of Naruto's heritage has split the citizen and shinobi councils. Then there is the matter that you now have the funds equal to 5 years of the budget of the village. When we add in all the money and investment accounts, your daughter and son-in-law had you now control 2/3 of the economy. I smiled as I rested my arm on my thigh. Well, certainly not what I set out to do, but nice to know. So, my guess is the shinobi don't care too much about it as it adds another shinobi clan, though upset the power of the civilian council had right. Hiruzen sighed and nodded before walking over and sitting down beside me. Yes, they are upset that a new powerhouse is here and it's clear they nor the elders can force you into compliance. So they are trying to convince me to have Naruto married to one of their daughters or to put in the craw when he'd 15. I huffed and nodded my head. I would like my grandson to marry the same as me and my daughter did. But if not, I will see to it if he finds good women to marry if he wants to be in the craw. Well, I may not like it, but it is his decision to make, but I will make it clear to him that he is to love and respect those women. Hiruzen nodded, seemingly happy with my words. Well, do you need anything? I smiled, then held my hand out. I want the shadow clone jutsu. You and I both know her has the reserves for the jutsu, plus it will help me teach him our clan's jutsu, jutsu, and if he can use it the old haki powers. Hiruzen looked at me, worry on his face. Can you? Hiruzen, I'm the last master known to use haki. I think I know when someone has that power. But, I'm surprised you didn't notice it, Hiruzen. He can sense emotions near perfectly and seemed to be Atlas to sense or well aware of other presences. To think at his age he's able to do that. It's an incredible experience to see someone so young to have that level of haki without knowing anything about it. I see. Well, can I ask if he has those powers as well? I hummed as I looked back at the forest. I don't know. But, one thing I am sure is that he'll become extremely powerful, maybe more so than you and me. Chapter 2. Shanks Pav. I smiled as I looked down at my grandson as he walked beside me with a look I loved. He had tried his old blue shorts and torn up shirt. He now wore a pair of black jeans with a shirt like mine and a blue sash around his waist. He had sandals. Like mine, with a long black coat on his shoulder. Tied on his back was a fine set of twin katanas. They were larger than he was at the moment, but he'd grow into them. Hey Gramps. Yeah? Naruto stopped and then looked up at me with a worried look on his face. I know, I sensed them too. Don't worry, if they try something, I will deal with them. He nodded before he turned around and I looked back and saw Hinata running after a small laughing girl. Hanabi. Naruto ran off to help catch the little girl. I laughed and turned to watch them try and fail till she slipped by them and came running right towards me. I laughed as I kneeled down, setting my clay sake jug down and grabbed the little girl as she tried to run by me. She laughed as she grabbed onto my arm. I laughed as I sat down on the street as Hinata and Naruto rushed over with a few Hyuga clan members came running up. Lady Hinata. Lady Hanabi. I laughed as Hinani grabbed onto my open shirt. She stomped her feet on the ground as she laughed up at me. I smiled down at her as she pulled on my shirt and tried to climb over my legs and reached for my sword. I patted her little head as the two clan members approached me. Lady Hanabi. Please leave Lord Shanks alone. I laughed as I wrapped my arm around her and stood up. Naruto grabbed my sake, I needed to talk with Lord Hiashi soon anyways. The two clan members stiffed as they looked up at me. The little girl grabbed onto my collar and laughed as she kicked her legs. Do you two think he and the elder could spare the time? They sweated as they looked at me. Why yes, Lord Shanks. I laughed as Naruto grabbed the sake jug, slung it over his shoulder, and grabbed Hinata's hand. She turned red, and I laughed as we started to follow the two clan members. Hanabi seemed to be clamming down as she sat on my arm and rested her head on my shoulder as she held onto my cape collar. I looked at Naruto and Hinata out of my eyes and smiled. A new couple may be coming soon. Naruto Pav. I smiled as I walked with Hinata's hand in mine. I looked at her and she looked away, her face all red. I stopped, making her stop as well. I set the sake jug down and then put a hand on her head. Do you feel sick, Hinata-chan? Her face reddened before steam came out of her mouth and started falling over. I grabbed her and noticed my Gramps and the two clan members circling around us. Is Lady Hinata okay? I shrugged as I picked her up in my arms as best I could and grabbed the sake jug. Wow, she's real light. I nodded and started to walk again. She's a little warm, but it is hot out today. Maybe she got overheated. Gramps laughed a little, then started to walk again. We best get this ladies home then, Naruto. Oh, and if you drop here when we get home, I'm throwing you into the pond again. I gulped, not wanting to be thrown into the pond again. The water was so cold. Yes sir. I held Hinata tighter and she rested her head on my shoulder and grabbed a hold of my shirt. She must cling to things in her sleep. I smiled for some strange reason. I like this. I'll have to ask Gramps about this when we get to the Hyuga clan compound. Naruto. I looked up and smiled, seeing Gramps as he stopped again. Yeah, Gramps. He smiled as he looked at me. When we get them home, you be on your best behavior. This will be the first time you will be in a formal setting, so behave. I nodded as we got going again. Thankfully we weren't too far from her home. We walked up and the two clan members quickly ran up to the guards. They spoke as we walked up to them. One quickly ran off and we were led into the clan compound. Lord Shank-sama, welcome to our home. I looked over and saw a woman who looked a lot like Hinata. Her hair was much longer and a slightly lighter shade. She had on a white kimono and had a sweet smile on her face. Lady Hinoka. I looked up at the other guard as he bowed to the lady. I quickly followed, doing my best to hold Hinata up as Gramps bowed to her. She laughed into her hand before she gave us a small bow back before taking Hanabi and holding her in her arms. Hinoka Haim. I looked back and saw Hiashi coming quickly with the guard. He looked at us and started to look angry as he looked right at me. I stepped back before my Gramps stepped in front of us, blocking us from him. Calm down Lord Hiashi. Naruto is carrying her because she passed out from the heat. I guess she was training before she ran off after her sister. I watched as the ordinarily emotionless Hiashi seemed to show some fear as he looked at Gramps. I felt a little relief as Hiashi backed down some. Yes she was and I guess she could have overheated. But, I do wish my clan's branch members had done their jobs. I laughed as Hinata slowly started to move around. I looked down at her as Gramps talked with the Hiashi. She moved closer to my chest and she sighed as she pulled on my shirt some. I smiled and looked up at Hana. Hinoka-sama, do you think we could get her to a bed? She smiled and nodded as she waved for me to follow her. I did and we walked off, leaving Gramps to deal with Hiashi. You know, you and Hinata sure look cute like that. I felt my face heat up as we walked through the homes. Hinata was making little movements and my arms made it a little hard to keep her in my arms. My right hand is still holding the rope around the sake jug. So, you're this Naruto-kun my daughter has been talking about all this time. I'd like to say thanks for saving her from her bullies. I noticed something. She was a beautiful lady with her hair and the size of her chest, which Hanabi was making more visible. Hanabi pulled her kimono over some and I could see her bar and some skin. I felt my face head up more and I looked away from her. Oh, your red face is cute. I looked down at Hinata and stopped as I locked eyes with her. She turned red and before I could say anything, she fainted again. Haha, a cute couple if I've ever seen one. By the way we're here. I looked up and saw we were at a huge house. It was a little bigger than mine and Gramps' house, but we had a forest around ours. I followed her in and did my best to show manners like Gramps told me. You can take her to the living room. The second door on the right and feel free to wait while I get drinks. I nodded and gave her the best bow I could. I quickly walked to the door, happy to get her weight out of my arms. No matter how light she was, my arms were burning. I walked past a few maids and they bowed to me as I walked. One smiled at me before she opened the door for me. Welcome young master. I blushed and bowed before standing back up. Thank you miss. She smiled and I walked into the living room. I walked over to the couch and tried to lay her down. She clung to my shirt and sighed, knowing her grip was really tight. I kneeled down as best I could with her weight. I dropped the jug and smiled, glad Gramps' sake was okay now. I got onto the couch and laid Hinata on the couch beside me, but half her body was still on me. Naruto-kun. I jumped, hearing her say my name before she pulled herself to my side more. She rested her head on my thigh and I smiled again before I rested my arm over her back and held her closer. Damn Naruto, you got game already? I stiffed and slowly turned my head, seeing Gramps smiling wide with Hiashi and Hinoka beside him. Hiashi looked ready to rip me apart, but Hinoka smiled as she looked at me. I laughed before pulling my arm off her, hoping Gramps would stop Hiashi again. Naruto, you know taking a lady the first time you bring her home is so forward. Gramps laughed as I felt my face heat up again. I growled before I reached up to grab one of my swords. Hiashi looked surprised and Gramps laughed before he waved his hand. Okay, I had my fun. Now, let's get you free, we need to go talk with Sir Hiashi. He and Hinoka walked over and Hinoka pulled her hands from my shirt. Gramps wrapped his arm around my chest and picked me up, then sat me back on my feet. I nodded before Hinoka held up Gramps' sake. Thank you Lady Hinoka. She smiled and gave us a small bow before Gramps turned and he started to walk out of the room. He followed behind Hiashi as he opened the door across the hall. I followed them into the room and looked around the new room. It was like we walked into a hall where another man with a woman was beside him. They looked at us and I smiled and waved to them before I remembered to bow. When I stood back up, the man had a slight smirk and the woman gave me a small smile and waved back. Mother, father, thank you for coming so quickly. Hiashi bowed to his parents before taking a seat between them and we sat down in front of them. I watched Gramps pull his sword off his side, then seat it down to his right side. I was confused. He didn't have an arm on that side, so why? I did as he did, took my swords off my back and set them down on my left. Now as I told you Lord Hiashi. Hinata has a great skill level for her age and you're right, she does need more confidence. But, I believe I know how to help her. How so? My granddaughter is afraid to fight. Gramps nodded as he looked at them. No, it's not fear, my daughter was like her when she was young. Your daughter? The elder Hyuga asked, and I looked away from them. Gramps sighed before I felt him putting his hand on my head. You know her as Konoha's Red Death or the Red Hot Habanero. You mean Kushina? Yes, she was my daughter. Didn't Sir Hiashi not explain what happened in the council meeting? Then Naruto-kun. I looked back and saw Hinata standing in the doorway. Shanks Pav. I smiled as I looked back at Naruto's little lady. Haha, Naruto, why don't you take your little lady and teach her the tree walking exercise I taught you? Okay, Gramps. He grabbed his swords and put them on his back again. He bowed to Hiashi and the two elders before he turned and walked over to the door. I smiled as Naruto took her hand again. I laughed a little as her face turned red and didn't faint this time. Come on, Hinata-chan, I heard you Hyugas have really good chakra control. I'm sure you'll get this down fast. Her face got even redder and I couldn't help but remember my wife Makino. I laughed, seeing what I knew was a future couple. Naruto pulled her away, making her follow him. Once the door closed, I turned back to look at the others. You were saying, Sir Shanks. She's not afraid, she's gentle. She doesn't want to harm anyone while training. My grandson, like all Uzumaki, has a massive reserves of chakra. He had learned to make shadow clothes so she can learn the gentle fist that way. I can also work on making her reserves larger as there is a secret that makes training easier. And what is that? I smiled before I looked over to the door again. You three can come in. I know you're there. The door opened and a little girl came running. I laughed as she jumped onto the side of my cloak. Hinoka walked in with a maid behind her. Hinoka took her seat next to Hiashi as Hanabi tried to climb up my right side. I laughed, then patted her head, making her laugh. She grabbed a hold of my hand and I led her around using my hand. Mommy, he's had hands feel like strange. Oh, you can talk, that's good to know. She smiled before sitting down on my right knee. I laughed as she leaned back into my side. It would seem the Hyuga Hersis and her sister have taken a liking to the Uzumaki clan head and heir. I nodded before I looked back at the adults. Hinoka was laughing and Hiashi looked at his mother with shock. I laughed before I cleared my throat before getting their attention back. Like I was saying, the secret is shadow clones. They have an ability not many know about. What is that? Hiashi seemed very interested. This jutsu allows the user to create one or more copies of themselves. A person's chakra is evenly divided between themselves and 4 clones. Creating 1 clone will give it half the user's chakra, creating 2 will give each a third of the user's chakra, and so on. Now as for the secret, shadow clones useful for intelligence gathering. A shadow clone can be sent into hostile territory, gather information without endangering the user, and disperse when finished, thus transferring what they've learned. But dispersing too many at once can kill the user, that way this jutsu is forbidden. What? I looked at the shocked elder and laughed a little as I grabbed the sake jug. I know, it was shocking for me when I fought the first time. He learned to counter some of my attacks by using them. And Naruto can already use this jutsu. I nodded before I held the jug out to them. The elder smiled, seeing my little gift. What kind is this? Junmai Ginjo, I figured it'd be best to bring a gift. Hiashi and the elder smiled before Hiashi stood up and then grabbed the jug. You even got my preferred kind. Maybe letting her spend some time with you as a chakra trainer for a time each day would be smart. She's already finished her training for the day. I have 2 questions. I looked at the elder mother and nodded before patting Hanabi's head. She stood back up and walked over to her mother. Yes, miss. What would you like to know? She smiled as she looked at me. First, how many clones can Naruto-kun make, and can you teach that jutsu to Hinata? Well, Naruto can make 100 right now, thanks to the massive chakra reserves we Uzumakis have. With that, many of our clan are born with Johin levels. And as far as I'm aware, your clan isn't known for large chakra reserves. I'd have to get her levels up before she learns this jutsu. Once she gets the tree walking down, her reserves will grow slowly. How long will it take to get her to a level where she can use the shadow clones? I hummed before nodding my head. If I can get them to water walking and teach them a few jutsu, their levels will increase over the next few weeks. But I won't have Naruto teach her the shadow clone jutsu until she has a high chunin level. That sounds more than fair. Why don't you take her for the rest of the day? Okay then, should I get her dinner or should it bring her home for dinner? What were you going to make? I smiled as I stood up. I'm looking to hire a maid to start making food and help clean at home. I can still make anything, but it's a little troublesome but doable. I could help with that. I blinked as I looked at Hinoka before she clapped her hand. A moment later, 2 maids came in, but I noticed their hands were a little rough and they had a little more muscle than the other maids. I see, so you want to send maids that can fight. They jumped and I laughed before walking over to them. I gave them a small bow. I thank you both for the help. So how does 80,000 yen a week sound? They gasped and I smiled as I looked at them. I have more than enough to make that, plus we have a private hot springs and training grounds your families are free to use if you'd like. But that's more than 4 times what the main house pays us. I blinked as I looked at them. Really, in Yuzushiogakure, that would be just the average pay. They smiled before they quickly bowed and rushed off, and I nodded my head before I looked back at the other. They looked shocked, and I waved before I noticed Hanabi dragging my sword across the floor. Little lady Hanabi. She jumped and looked up at me with the sweetest smile possible. I promise I was going to put it by the door. I laughed before I walked over and grabbed the sheath. Well, thanks for that, little lady. I slipped it under my sash before I patted her head. You're free to come along and watch them train if you want. Yeah? I laughed before she grabbed my hand and started to pull me along. Follow me. I smiled as I walked behind her. You just like old time. Naruto Pov 3 weeks later. I smiled as I stood upside down from my branch and smiled over at Hinata as she did the same in the tree next to mine. I looked over at the pond and saw 20 of my clones and the 5 fighting Gramps on the water. Glad to see my control and chakra level have increased so much in the last few weeks. And Naruto-kun. I turned my head back and saw he had a smile on her face, but it was still red. Yeah, Hinata-chan. She smiled before she jumped down to the ground and then waved for me to follow her. I followed her as she walked deeper into our small forest. I smiled, seeing her new clothes on. She had changed from her well-covering black training suit to a pair of pants with a small V-cut t-shirt. She walked up to a small blanket with a basket and a large apple juice bottle. I had Mayu and Ima set us a picnic lunch. I smiled, grabbed her, and pulled her over. She laughed a little. I was happy to see she was getting a little confidence now. Shanks Pov. I smiled as I looked down at the little couple from my tree. Well, the next few years are going to be interesting. Chapter 3. Naruto Pov 2 years later. Ha! I dodged her gentle fist strike from the left and she sent a blast of chakra into the water. I jumped back, missing a pair of clones fighting on the water with us. I landed next to the second pair we made, then rushed Hinata with my 2 wooden swords. I dashed through the 2 sets of clones as Hinata charged through the as well. I channeled my chakra into the wood as she got close. I swung the wooden swords hard, sending 2 chakra blades down at her. Soru. Hinata vanished, dodging the attack. She appeared beside me, and I knew what was coming. Hush so Ken wave. Soru. I jumped some move to dodge the attack, but I couldn't hold a candle with Hinata's control over Soru. I got a good 20 feet away before the shockwave opened the pond. Our clones kept fighting as the wave went under them. I sighed as the pond settled before Gramps called out. Okay you two, that's enough for today. Ima called out to us and we dispelled our clones and walked off the water. So Hinata-chan, how do you think the clan meeting is going? Who knows, Naruto-kun? But, now that we're 8 we're going to the academy soon. So, how did the council take it when your grandpa cashed in the other half of your clan's riches? I looked at her as she smirked. Oh, they lost it. Now we have enough money to live off of for over a decade. Danzo and the elders all but trying to kill him. But, we don't have to worry about that. We need to get our spare clothes and head over to the hot springs and get cleaned up. Right, Naruto-kun? We walked over to the porch and I was glad to see our clothes with some cut apples. We sat down and Hinata sat beside me and leaned into my side. She rested her head on my shoulder and sighed as she started to eat a piece of apple. I smiled, then wrapped my arm around her. For some reason, Gramps just laughed off. I saw Mayu and Ima looking at us from over their shoulders. Why, you two seemed like you're having fun. We jumped as Gramps walked out from around the house with a bag over his shoulder. Hey Gramps, what is with the bag? I thought I'd get you two gift as my way of showing you how proud of you two I am. To master all these skills before you were 10. Gramps walked over and kneeled in front of us. He opened the back and we smiled, seeing the 2 wrapped bags from the clothes store that went looking in. I smiled as I ripped mine open and saw the knee-length orange cloak with our clan symbol on the back. At the bottom was a set of 3 black lines. I smiled as I took my black cloak off and put my new cloak on. Oh Kami. I jumped as I looked at Hinata as she had an orange jack that looked like my cloak. But on the back of her jack was my clan symbol with a smaller Hyga clan symbol below our symbol. Hinata smiled, then hugged the jacket and looked at me. We match. I nodded and smiled as she quickly put the jacket on and smiled as she got up and ran around with it on. I smiled as I watched her as she ran around. Naruto. I blinked, then looked up at Gramps as he watched her run around. You Gramps. He looked down at me and smiled before sighing. I have to leave the village for a little while. The Hokage asked me to go and get an old friend Tsunade-chan, the best medic the village ever had. I shouldn't be gone for no more than a week at most. I nodded, glad that Gramps was finally taking an active role in the village. Old friend. Do you know her? Haha, well let's just say that me and her have a past. But this time I don't think this time I'll get punched, but Urbecuous I got drunk. I looked at my Gramps as his cheeks turned red as he rubbed the back of his head. I hummed as I looked at him, then nodded my head as I stood up. Whatever Gramps, just don't be stupid again. Oh? I stopped knowing that. Oh well. I took off at a run, knowing what was coming for me. Get back here you Bart. Ignoring his yell, I ran over the water, not wanting to get thrown again. Soru. Gramps appeared before me and screamed as he raised a hockey-covered fist. I let myself fall into the water and kicked off the water hard with my chakra. I rocketed out of the other side of the pond and quickly used my chakra to dry my clothes as I jumped into the trees. Not bad brat. I got grabbed on the head and slowly turned my head and saw Gramps smiling. Come on, Gramps, you know I was kidding. Gramps smiled as he moved his hand, grabbed my jacket and slung me out of the trees into the pond. Shanks Pav. I laughed as I watched my grandson skip over the water before he splashed on the last hit. I watched as Hinata yelled his name before running onto the water to get out again. I smirked as I sat on the tree branch and watched Hinata slowly dragged him out of the water. My little grandson, oh the hearts you'll break. Don't you think that was cruel? I smiled as I looked down at Mayu. Maybe but, you got to admit it is cute to see Naruto with his head on Hinata's lap while out cold. True, and Our Lady has asked us to help those two out. I laughed as I rested my chin on my hand. I can't help but wonder what the future holds for those two. Still hoping he'll turn down the craw when he's old enough. You know, he has started to gain the attention of a few other girls. One is the snake girl from the Dango stands. You know, the one after buying her a box to thank her for stopping those men who attacked him last week. The other is the young blonde girl he talks to when she and her father Inoichi when they come over with Lord Hiashi for your poker nights. I jumped and laughed as I looked away from her. So you two know about that. Please don't tell Lady Hinoka or Inoichi's wife. They'd kill them when they know how much those two have lost to me. They'd come and kill me for taking a month's worth of budget from them. Oh? What do I get? I frowned and pulled a small stack of cash from a storage scroll on my sash side. I threw a small stack into her waiting hand. Haha, thank you Sir Shanks. I huffed as I watched her walk off, counting the stack. I sighed as I watched her walk across the pond and saw Ima as she walked out with 2 bathing robes. Damn woman got me by the balls before I knew it. I sighed before I jumped down from the tree and walked across the pond. I walked past Hinata as she ran her hand over Naruto's hair. I laughed as I stopped to look at the two. Hinata looked up at me. Sir Shanks, can I ask you something? I blinked and nodded, making her smile. Can Naruto-kun stay with our clan while you're away? I don't see why not but you know your father is going to lose it when you bring him home. She laughed as she put a hand on his chest and started to run her hand over his hair again. Father will have to get used to it. Naruto-kun is always going to be around me if I have my way. I blinked as I looked down at the little girl as she smiled down at him. Okay, maybe this girl is more aware of these things than I gave her credit for. Maybe I should start planning for a great-grandchild in a decade or less if she or that Anko girl if he started taking a liking to her. I walked into the house and up the steps for one of the pre-sealed travel scrolls I made in the case. I needed them. I wonder how she's going to take seeing me again. I know down my old friend was killed, but my thought trailed off as I thought of the man who fucked the woman my Makino liked. Sir Shanks. I looked back and saw Anbu in a plain mask. Tell Danzo to leave this place alone, Root. I know where the bases are in and outside the village. 16 in the village and 27 outside with the main base on the hill east of the village. He stood there for a moment, then left my house. I felt 12 more leave the house and the area around us. I could feel everyone was still calm and relaxed energy. I guess I do need to activate the defense seals. I slipped all but 2 money scrolls into my storage scrolls on my side. I knew what Danzo wanted and he wouldn't take this laying down. I turned and started to walk to the far room I knew still had active seals. Sir Shanks. I turned to see Mayu and Ima both looked like they knew. It was Danzo's root Anbu. I didn't think he'd try these, but now that I made the lines clear, he's trying his luck. So, would you two go ahead and take a week's worth of clothes for Naruto and head back to your compound? Looks like I have an extra stop to make. I tapped my scroll and a money scroll puffed out. I grabbed the scroll and held it out to them. What is this? Pay for a personal S-class mission for the Hyuga clan to protect Naruto until I return. Oh, and if you'd like, I could take those seals off as thanks for all your work. They blinked and then they rushed me. As the two pressed hands to my chest, I put my back against the wall. You can remove the cage bird seal. I nodded before I tapped the scroll holding all the counter formulas I'd made over the last 20 months. I've heard they use these seals to cause you all pain with a hand seal. I know they altered the original seal, given my grandfather was the one to build it. They nodded as I pulled the 2 papers out as moved some bandages off their foreheads. I frowned as I looked at the X with two revere's hooks on their forehead. Tell Hiashi this stops now as I hold the rights to the original contract, this if I decide to remove the seal of anyone who has a bastardized version on them or to make good on the contract to have the original placed on the whole like it was agreed on when my clan gave yours the seal. Tears filled their eyes as I placed both counter-formula seals on their heads. I raised my two fingers and activated the formulas. They hissed in pain for a moment before the pieces of paper fell to the floor. They rushed to the bathroom. It worked. They started to cry and cheer before Ima ran out of the house and Mayu quickly rushed into Naruto's room. I smiled before I walked over and watched her put clothes into a bag. Hey. She looked up from the bag. Here is a scroll explaining everything we just talked about. He and his father may not be aware of this, and if they are, well. She smiled and then took the scroll, and before I knew it, she kissed my cheek and ran off with the scroll in bag. Damn, I guess being 46 doesn't put too much of a damper on my game. Maybe I should try to get with Tsunade this time around. She was 2 years younger than me. Gramps. I smiled at Naruto's yell and laughed before I walked out and sealed the room shut as I walked down the steps. Naruto stood at the bottom with Hinata holding onto his arm as Mayu hugged Hinata, tears in her eyes. You made Mayu-chan cry, old man. I laughed as Naruto tried to punch me. I slapped each punch away and smiled as he tried to fight me. I grabbed his arm as he kicked my shine. Easy Naruto, Mayu can explain it when you two get a little older. But, she's not crying from pain or sadness. I let his arm go and then started for the door, all of them close behind. When they walked out of the house, I placed my hand over the seal on the wood and activated the house security seal on the house. Gramps. I nodded as I walked up to the gate and closed them before activating the seal around the compound. I nodded as I turned and looked down at Naruto. I kneeled to be level with him and put my hand on his head. Be good for the Hyuga clan, Naruto. I'll be back with Tsunade before you know it. Okay, Gramps. They started to walk away and I smiled as I walked to the main gate. Naruto Pov 2 days later. Naruto-kun. I opened my eyes and leaned my head back to look down at Hanabi from my sitting position on the underside of the roof. Hey Hanabi-chan, what can I do for you? Father and grandfather want to have a word with you. Plus, some lady is here looking for you. Sure, Hinata-chan, you want to come? I turned my head and smiled as I looked at my best friend beside me. She opened her eyes and smiled at me as she looked at me. Sure, besides we need to get something to drink, it's a little hot out today. I nodded and we both stood up. Iced tea or water? We jumped down to the balcony next to Hanabi. The iced tea with some lemon would be nice. I nodded and Hanabi grabbed onto my right arm, a happy smile on her face. I laughed as Hinata grabbed onto my left arm with an annoyed pout on her face. I blushed as the two glared at one another. Can we please just go? They smiled and nodded before we started to walk. I blushed harder as the maids laughed and talked with each other. So Naruto-kun, do you think I can sit with you at dinner tonight? I laughed as Hinata pulled on my arm hard. No. Naruto-kun will be sitting with me. Hanabi pulled on my arm hard, pulling me to the side just. Hinata jerked my other arm and my shoulders started hurting. I used Soru to get out between the two and started to run down the hall. Naruto-kun. I heard them yell before I heard them running after me. I ran for the training hall, knowing that is where Hiashi spent most of the day with his father, watching the main house as they trained. I have to get to him before they catch me. I don't want to spare against him again if he catching Hinata clinging to me again. Hanabi would only make it 10 times worse. Naruto. Sorry Lady Hinoka, I can't talk. I smiled as I rounded the corner and saw the training hall door open. I slowed down, not wanting to just burst in and be rude to everyone in the hall. Naruto-kun. I froze as the two jumped onto my back and we crashed into the training hall. We rolled across the floor a few times and Hanabi lost her grip on my cloak. We stopped and Hinata sat on my stomach and rubbed her head before looking down at me. I guess you want to have another match, Naruto. I paled before I turned my head. I looked at an angry-faced Hiashi and a giggling Anko. She smiled at me, then waved her hand down and I looked back at Hinata and saw I'd put my hands on Hinata's thighs without realizing it. She put her hands on my chest before standing up with a red face and used Soru to get out of the room. I jumped up after that and got on my hands and knees in front of Hiashi. I swear I didn't mean for that to happen. The bad. I jumped to the side as Hiashi slammed a gentle fist onto the ground where I was a second again. The wood under his hand was destroyed. Gaki. Last long enough and I'll give you a prize. Ah. I used Soru to get some space between us and she charged me in his gentle fist stance. I dropped into the crimson fist Gramps has been teaching me. Okay, Naruto, remember to lock his arm and aim for his Adam's apple, then follow through with his best to throw. I dodged to the side of his gentle fist strike and tried to grab his wrist. But, he was too fast for me to grab his wrist. He turned and I barely managed to dodge another strike from him. I clenched my fist. I infused chakra into my fist and arm. I released the chakra as I aimed for his right knee. He jumped back and I swung my fist down to the ground. I smashed the wood on the floor, breaking it into splinters. He and Anko looked shocked as I pulled my fist out of the wood. "How did you do that, Gaki?" Anko had a smile on her face and Hiashi looked quite surprised. Gramps and I finally got to the advanced set of moved from the Crimson Fist style. Now that I have the 20 stances down and finally have the chakra control, I can start to use the real style. But I know I can't win this. I have no real fighting experience. Hiashi blinked and a smirk formed on his face as he looked at me. "Well, consider me impressed, Naruto. To have this level of skill and control at your age is remarkable." I smiled before he spoke again as he charged me. Hinata has also improved greatly over these 2 years as well. I deflected the 2 strikes using my chakra as Gramps taught me to. I covered my forearms in a thick layer of chakra and did my best to block each strike. Thanks to the 2 years of having my clones fight Hinata every day, I memorized about 90% of the stances. Crimson Axe. I swung my leg hard and a chakra blade came from my foot, forcing him back. The blade impacted the wall siding the wooden support and 2 feet on either side. "Aki?" Anko looked at me with wide eyes. I looked to the side and Hiashi dropped his stance shocked. "Crimson style, it must a dangerous style with those defensive skills and the 2 attacks you used. Redirecting a gentle fist is not an easy feat for an experienced fighter." I sighed as I lowered my fist as looked at him. "Yeah, but that much chakra in my arms and legs sting and burn once I stop the flow of chakra. Gramps said it would take a few years before my body got used to it. He also told me this style was made for users of our bloodline." "How so, Gaki?" I looked back at Anko as she walked over and wrapped her arms around my neck like she does every time she sees me. She rested her chin on my head and I could feel 2 soft orbs barely touching the back of my forehead. I blushed and I sighed as I looked away from Hiashi. His eye twitched as he looked at us. "Anko, I got him here for you now, please get on with it." "Right, look, Gaki, I wanted to thank you and the old man for helping me when I ran short of cash the last 2 months. You know I just started the 3rd year of Ninja Academy. You two made it so I could afford the gear and tools. After that snake ran off nobody is willing to help me. Not to mention you helped feed my dango addiction. I still say our omen is better." She tightened her arms around my neck. "Tighten. Do not start that again with me, Gaki." I laughed as she pulled me back into her body. I gulped as I saw Hinata walk into the room. She looked at us and I watched her face turn red from anger. She got into the hush so can wave stance. I quickly threw my hands back, grabbed her thighs and pulled her off the ground. "Sorrow." We reappeared outside and I quickly put her down before the shockwave destroyed the doors. "What the hell?" "Sorry, Anko. Give me the prize later." I used my Soru again, hoping to get enough of a head start. "Naruto-kun." She appeared in front of me, still in her hush so can wave stance. I jumped as she sent another palm wave at me. I landed behind her and hugged her into my chest, knowing this would stop her anger for a moment. She relaxed into my arms before I used Soru again. I reappeared in front of the shocked main house and the branch members cleaning up the mess we'd made. Hinata held onto my arm and I looked at Hiashi pleadingly. He nodded before he walked over and picked her up, breaking Hinata out of her bliss. She started kicking and I knew she couldn't use Soru while she didn't have a sure foothold. "Go on, Naruto, we'll calm her down, why don't you and Anko go out for a while?" "No. Naruto-kun, let's go get Roman." Hanabi rushed over and grabbed onto my waist. I laughed and patted her head before I picked her up and put her on my back. "Okay, I'll tell you what." I started to walk behind Hiashi Anko at my side. "Once your sister relaxes well I'll go." Hanabi nodded then we looked at Hinata as Hiashi let her down. She dusted herself off and then walked over to me. She grabbed a hold of my jacket and gave me a little shake. "The only girls allowed on your back is me and Hanabi unless I tell you otherwise." She gave me another hard shake before letting me go, then walked over to Anko and kicked her shine hard. She jumped up and down on one leg cursing under her breath as she glared down at Hinata. "Hinata." Hinata turned the kicked Hiashi's shine just as hard, making his jump on one leg like Anko. She looked back at me and I gulped, scared of the jealous Hinata. Hanabi gripped my neck tight and she was shaking a little bit as she looked at her sister. "Sis is scary." I nodded and I could feel Hiashi and Anko do the same. Chapter 4. Shanks Pav. I walked down the dirt road heading for the bar of the town. I stopped at the door, I looked around and smiled as I sensed a powerful life force inside the bar, with a second but only a third of the power. "Yeah, that's her. But, who is the other one?" I opened the door to the bar and walked in. I looked around and saw a woman sitting at the bar with 2 bottles beside her. She had a fair skin with brown eyes and straight blonde hair that parted above her forehead. Her hair was shoulder-length bangs that framed her face and the rest reached her lower back. She wore heels, sandals, black jeans, a half-kimono top and a green gambler jacket. Behind her was another fair-skinned woman. She was of average height and had a slender build with onyx eyes and jet black hair. Her hair was straight and shoulder-length with bangs that covered her ears and framed her face. She wore a long bluish-black kimono with white trimmings, held closed by a wide obi, and open-toed sandals with low heels. I smiled and tapped the wall 3 times before I kicked the wall. Tsunade's head shot up and she looked over at me. The other woman turned and I saw a pig in her arms. It had a red coat on with a large bead necklace. Tsunade stood up, knocking the 2 empty bottles over. Shanks. I smiled as I rested my arm on my sword. It's been a while, huh? She pushed past the woman and jumped onto me, hugging me tightly. I patted her back before she lowered her arms, then she pulled back. She grabbed my cape and pulled the right side away. I sighed as she looked at my missing forearm. Why your forearm? I laughed and patted her back again. Yeah, lost it in a nasty fight with the Jinchuriki of the 4 tails. The fight lasted 3 days and I lost it to a lava attack. I pulled the sleeve up and showed her the burned scars. Oh Kami. I laughed as I pulled the sleeve back down over my elbow. I smiled as I put my hand on the back of her head and pressed my forehead against hers. I'm sorry for not coming to find you sooner. I was trying to find any survivors of our village's fall. She wrapped her arms around my chest, moved her head from mine, and buried her head in my chest. You damn fool. Why the hell didn't you come from me after you were hurt? I laughed as I ran my hand down her back. I know I was stupid for not trying to find you for help. But, I got news if you'd like to hear. She nodded as the other woman walked over. I found more than 100 Uzumaki clan members, many of which I've sent letters to over the last few months. I've settled in Konoha and get this, my grandson Naruto was alive. She pulled her head out of my chest. A confused look turned to a pissed-off look. My godson is alive. I blinked before she pulled away from me and had her fist balled. I blinked before she walked over to the other woman. Shizune, get ready to get back to the leaf. I'm going to see who lied to me about my godson was dead. The woman nodded and I was happy to have her name. Shizune, that is a lovely name miss. She blushed and bowed before she walked over and grabbed 2 large bags from where Tsunade was sitting. I can seal those in a scroll if you'd like. Shizune looked at me and smiled before she nodded. I pulled out a medium-sized scroll from my main storage scroll. I unrolled the scroll and Shizune put the bags on top of the scroll. I clapped my hand down on the scroll and sealed the bags inside. It is so good to know I have a scroll master with us. I looked up at a smiling Tsunade. Well, I'm glad to be traveling with 2 beauties. But, to be honest Tsunade, I expected a fight when I found you. Tsunade blushed and looked away from me. Well, I know you wouldn't drag me back kicking and screaming. But, I want answers about why I was told my godson was dead. I nodded as I closed the scroll and put it back into my main scroll. Oh, I already have them beaten into their place after 2 years. I found those damn villagers jazzing up Rust and beat Naruto. I felt my anger rising again, some of the floors cracking under my feet. My 6-year-old grandson had to dig through trash to find food and clothes. I went to that damn village to visit my daughter grave after getting that damn letter, and I find that. I made my point quick and clear. Tsunade's kai exploded and Shizune looked ready to rip someone apart. It was those damn elders and civilian council, right? I nodded as Shizune paid the tab. Yeah, not long after I found all but the Hyuga clans tried to adopt Naruto. The Inyazuka clan tried more times than anyone else. Soon the Inyazuka clan head seemed to have had her clan keep an eye out for Naruto and she could. I'll have Toy thank her for that later. But, what about the Hyuga clan? Why haven't they tried? We walked out of the bar. Not sure, but I never cared enough about their clan to find out. But, the heiress and her sister have taken a great deal of interest in Naruto. What are their names? Hinata is the heiress, and Hanabi is the name of her younger sister. But, I think I made a mistake by training Hinata with Naruto. She's become rather attached to him. Tsunade raised an eyebrow as we walked. But attached or? I sighed before I looked up at the sky. I'm afraid she or that Anko girl will jump him once he's become a ninja. I know they care for him and not his clan heir stats, but I'm not even in my 50s yet. I don't want to be a great-grandfather yet. Tsunade laughed as she looked at me. 46 and already a grandfather, Shanks. Your daughter was born when you were what, 21? I nodded and sighed as we walked. Yes, Kushina died at 23, sure as a ninja she lived longer than many of her class from what I know of. But, she was still too young. Tsunade and Shizune nodded a second later. I looked down at Tsunade before an evil smile formed on her face. Well, why don't we figure out what I'm going to do to that damn council and those damn elders? Narutopov 2 days later. This is scary. I nodded as Hanabi hid behind her mother as I watched Hinata destroy another branch member in a training spar. Her gentle fist was even with any of the adults of the main family. I chewed on a dango stick from some dango Anko came by with earlier. At least she didn't use Soru or the Hush So Ken wave. Naruto-kun. I came out of my thoughts before looking over at Hinata. My turn. She smiled and nodded, then got to the other side of the training hall. I got up and summoned my 2 wooden swords. The whole of the main branch watched as I got into the first crimson sword stance. I crossed my arms, my swords facing down to the ground, also touching. My feet should wide apart. My upper body forwards, my head low. I watched as Hinata dropped into her hybrid stance. I smiled as she dropped into a low stance with her left leg far out. Her right knee was bent with her hand in a praying mantis 2-finger stance. What is that stance, Hinata? Hinata ignored her father and then jumped at me with Soru. The wood under her feet shattered as she vanished. I saw the shocked faces as I threw my body to the side as she appeared a strict just missing my chest. I swung my sword and then caught her side. I jumped back as a puff of smoke coming from her. Shadow clones again. Yes. As quickly as I could, I used the armament haki I'd learned so far. Why does my armament suck so much? I felt 2 fingers slam into my side before a shockwave palm strike slammed into me. I coughed as a shockwave slammed me into the wall. I kicked myself free and looked at Hinata as she waved her hand in the air. I hate that blown line of yours sometimes, Naruto-kun. I smirked before I swung my swords, sending a blast of air at her. She crossed her arms as she was sent flying out of doors to the outside training ground. I jumped out after her father, mother, and everyone else close behind. I landed on the small pond as Hinata landed and skidded across the field before she stopped and dropped back into her stance. I smiled before going into the second base stand. I turned my left wood sword, let the tip dip into the water, and pulled my right wood sword on my shoulder. I pushed my left leg back and bent my right, making my body lean forward. Hinata smiled as she looked at me. Oh? Going for speed this time, Naruto-kun? Yep. I summoned my chakra and filled my lungs, turning it into the air with it, then I turned my spitting the stick at her. I used my Soru and appeared in front of her as she dodged the stick. I swung my left sword up, just catching the edge of her jacket. She jumped from my lower swing, but my overhead caught her as I forced her into the wall, my sword at her throat. I smiled as Hinata glared at me. Using my observation haki, I felt Hiashi and his elite clan's men with him. No fair. You cheated with that stick. I tapped her neck and stepped back. That's what 8-6 now. Hinata puffed up her cheeks as she looked at me. You cheated. I laughed as I felt the elites go off. All fair in a fight, Hinata-chan. Ah. I laughed more as Hinata started beating my arm with her 2 balled fists, calling me Baka repeatedly. Third person Pav. The whole of the Hyuga clan watched as the heiress that they all thought was so weak. She was destroying the best they had. But her hybrid stance beat out his gentle fist in speed and power. But what shocked them more was the fact that the so-called demon boy was keeping pace like it wasn't a problem. He matched her speed and power, if not beating it. Can't believe they are that strong. They looked behind them to see a few Anbu looking at the 2 children. In the center of them was a group of shocked clan heads with a Hokage. They looked back and saw Naruto start running away from an angry-looking Hinata. They watched as 2 children jumped onto the main house's roof. Naruto ran for his life. Hokage, do you think we could get Lord Shanks to teach the rest of the clan heirs? Fame asked as she watched a boy she tried to adopt run from Hiashi's pup. Having seen what the 2 could do, she knew without a doubt that they'd both become alphas in their own right. Naruto-pov. Why did I bring up training with Anko? I jumped down to the training field and ran like hell. And why is she so mad? Anko is our friend, why wouldn't I teach her a few tricks? Naruto-kun, get back here and take my punch like a Uzumaki. I kept running, not wanting to get hit in of my chakra opponents. I looked to the side and smiled, seeing the Hokage and the other clan heads. Sorry, Jiji. I took off running for the old man. I jumped onto the group and over Tsum, one of the few clan heads I respected. I heard Jiji yell from the shockwave. I jumped onto the compound wall and then started running again. I tried to round a corner, but someone grabbed onto the collar of my cloak. I reached for my katanas, but the voice stopped me. Aki, it's me. I looked back and saw Anko looking down at me. She smiled as she looked me in the eye. Slipped away from your little fangirl. I sighed before I heard rushing feet. I grabbed Anko, pulled her into my arms, and then jumped onto the roof above us. I watched as Hinata rushed by guards trying to keep pace with her. I sighed as I watched her rush by under us. Damn, that girl has it bad for you. I nodded as I jumped back down, letting Anko go. Yeah, I mean, she was my first friend, but damn, she is scary at times. Yeah, but back to why I was coming to find you. I heard you learned your elemental affinity. I nodded before I held up 3 fingers. Yeah, I have wind, water and lightning. Gramps told me he has lightning, but the other two we don't have many of in the village. But he has scrolls in the master scroll from our homeland. I watched a smile creep over Anko's face as we walked out of the alley. Do you think I could steal a few from you, Gaki? Never hurts to learn a few new things. I shrugged as I started heading for the main street. We can talk over the greatest food, ramen. The smile vanished before she grabbed my hair. Don't start that with me again, Naruto. Dango is the best. I grabbed her overcoat and pulled her down to be level with me. Ramen is the best and I'm happy to fight you over it. We both raised our right fists and we glared at one another. My Naruto-kun, don't you two look like you're having fun? We froze and slowly turned our heads and saw Hinata standing there, tapping her foot. She had her arms crossed and the glare on her face was one I knew well. Hinata-chan, I promise. If you let my running away go, I'll take you out for a nice walk or to get some cinnamon buns. As many cinnamon buns as I want. I nodded as Anko and I let go of one another. Hinata smiled before walking over and wrapped her arms around my right before she kicked Anko's shine hard. She yelled and cursed as Hinata pulled me down the street. Damn, Hinata has changed so much other the last 2 years. Naruto-kun, do you think we'll be in the same class at the academy? I got my feet in step with Hinata before I responded. I don't know, but it would be nice to know I'll be with my best friend. She smiled with a slight blush and rested her head on my shoulder. I saw some villagers glaring at us as we walked, but having heard of Gramps' threats to the village and the economic power my clan now held, they couldn't touch me, let alone kick us out. You have that smile again. I laughed as Hinata locked our fingers together. I'm just thinking about how now they can't tell us to leave or throw us out of the stores. Remember the store owner grabbed me and threw me out? I didn't think Gramps could catch me and kick him in the back at the same time. Haha, yo, I remember. Oh, father was so mad when he heard they called me a demon lover. I still have a hard time believing it took the two to less than an hour to have the store closed down. I nodded as we got to the bakery. I opened the door and we walked into the shop floor. The smell of cinnamon buns filled the air and I was happy to see them pulling out a fresh tray from the oven. We got in line and Hinata rubbed her cheek onto my shoulder. I laughed as we waited. I heard the door open again and then close. Hey, move. I blinked, then turned my head and saw a boy standing behind us. He had black hair with a blue shine to it. His skin was pale with black eyes. He had on a high-collared long-sleeve shirt and white shorts. He had bandages wrapped around his forelegs and ninja sandals on. No. We got here before you. He narrowed his eyes at me, then looked at Hinata. He reached out to grab her and I moved and made Hinata move to the side. She moved her head as I spoke to this guy. Naruto-kun. Hinata turned and we both looked at this guy. He glared at Hinata before he tried to shove us. I smacked his hands away and he looked really annoyed. Don't touch my Hinata-chan. I wrapped my arms around Hinata and she smiled. She leaned into my chest and smiled. Look, you and your little bitch need to get out of my way. I'm an Uchiha and be glad I don't take her from you, dope. Whatever, duckbutt. We were here first, now wait your turn or jet the beat down, it's clear you need. I watched his frown turn into a snarl. You damn dope. He pulled his fist back and I reached for my sword. Enough. We all jumped and looked up to see the head baker looking down at us. He glared down at us, but his face softened as he looked at us. Naruto, I saw you walk in with Hinata. I got a baker's dozen of fresh cinnamon buns set aside in a bag. Come back with the money later. No reason you two take what this Uchiha is spitting at you. Thanks, chef. I'll be sure to bring a tip for you. Hinata let my hand go and get her cinnamon buns. I locked eyes with this Uchiha again, my arms crossed as we looked at each other. He glared at me with hate-filled eyes. You can glare all you want. I don't have to do a thing you tell me to. You will do as I say. The Uchiha are the strongest clan in the village. I laughed as Hinata walked beside me, a cinnamon bun in hand. He looked away from me, then looked at Hinata. He looked her up and down, then smirked as he looked at her face. He pointed at her with a smirk on his face. You, now that I've seen both sides, I think I'll be taking you from this loss. In one swift motion, Hinata kicked him into the wall, knocking the air out of him. He crashed back down to the ground, coughing up his lungs. Come on, Naruto-kun. Hinata grabbed my hand, but I knew it wasn't right to walk away without paying, even if he said it was fine. Just wait outside, Hinata-chan. I can't leave without paying the man. The team gets up, I'll deal with him. Okay, Naruto-kun. She quickly walked out of the shop and I pulled my red swirl wallet out of my cargo shorts. I sensed a punch coming my way and leaned to the right, making the punch miss. I leaned from side to side and jumped when he tried to sweep my legs. Once I'd paid. I turned fast and kicked the team hard in the face. I sent him through the door Hinata was holding open. I watched him skip across the road a few times before he crashed into the building across the street. Nice kick, kid. I smirked and gave him a wave before I slipped my wallet back into my pocket and then walked out of the still open door. I wrapped my arm around Hinata's shoulder as a crowd formed around the team. Let's walk around, Naruto-kun. Hinata finished her bun as we rounded the corner to the Hokage Tower. I stopped seeing Gramps walking down the street with two women. They both looked beautiful and I smiled. Hey Gramps. They all stopped and Gramps turned around to look at us. He smiled, but the second the blonde-hair woman saw me, she started to run at us. I panicked and before I knew it, I picked Hinata up, making her up before I used Soru to get on top of a building. I looked down over to the side of the roof and jumped back as she jumped up and grabbed a hold of us. Naruto. She shoved Hinata away and pulled me into a tight hug. I struggled for a second before I realized she wasn't hurting me. I'm so sorry, Naruto. I'm sorry I wasn't there. She rubbed her cheek on mine and I looked at a shocked Hinata. I mouthed help me before Gramps jumped up a woman on his shoulder. Tsunade, maybe try not to smother my grandson. This woman glared up at him, letting me go a little. Leave me alone. I'm trying to make up time with my godson before I go and kill those damn elders and those damn councils. Expect soon, I think I'll take my second apprentice from her clan. After she yelled at him, she crushed me again in her arms. I stood there for another second before I wrapped my arms around her lightly. I didn't know this woman, but Gramps seemed to. If he trusted her, then that was good enough for me. She started to sob as she clung to me. I promise I'll always be here like your grandfather, Naruto. I smiled and patted her back before I tried to pull back. She clung to me for a second before Shanks put a hand on her shoulder. Slowly she let me go and stood up, looking down at me. I smiled up at her and she smiled back down at me. Naruto-kun. I looked back over to Hinata as she looked down at the street. I blinked and walked over and I saw members of the Uchiha clan tearing the street apart. Must be trying to find me. I beat that team pretty bad. Why did you beat an Uchiha? I looked up at Gramps and frowned. He called Hinata-chan a bitch and said he was going to take her. No one will call a lady that or treat her like property with me around. You raised him well, Shanks. But that Uchiha brat needs to be taken down a peg. I looked back at the lady Gramps called Tsunade before she jumped down to a tall woman with black hair. The woman looked shocked and quickly bowed to her. She waved her hand before she started to talk to her. After a second, she and the woman looked back up and waved for us to come down. Come on, Naruto, you carry your girl down. I glared up at Gramps before he smirked and jumped down. Then Naruto-kun. I sighed before I picked Hinata up in my arms, making her turn red again, then used Soru to jump down. I landed in front of Tsunade, making her smile. I set Hinata back on her feet, then turned and grabbed the team's hand as he reached for her. I used my new chakra-enhanced strength. I started to crush his arm. He screamed as he grabbed onto my arm. Hey. Let go of my brother. I let his arm go and sidestepped a girl before she could hit my back. She missed the punch and went to fall. I threw my arms out, catching her mid-fall. She stopped and I noticed she was as light as Hinata was. I pulled her back onto her feet. She looked at me and I saw she was about as tall as Hinata and Ino. She had her black hair tied back into a ponytail. She had on a black battle thigh-length kimono with red trim with a pair of black shorts coming out from the bottom. She had sandals like ninjas on. I smiled at her before I sidestepped a punch after the team, letting her get hit in the face. They both went to the ground, the girl yelling for him to get off. Sasuke, get off me. I sighed as I looked down at them, then I kicked Sasuke off her and he coughed as he held his ribs. I held my hand out to the girl as she held her right cheek. She took my hand and I helped up back onto her feet. Naruto-kun, she's going to have a bruised cheek. I nodded as Hinata spoke up. I can help with that. Tsunade walked over, hands glowing green. A lady, Tsunade. The girl smiled as she looked up at her and I saw the red cheek. She put her hand on her cheek and I sighed before I turned, pulling one of my kunai. I blocked Sasuke's kunai and I looked at the mad look in his eyes. You're not going to win. I summoned my wooden sword but stopped when an Uchiha man grabbed me and pulled me up and back from Sasuke. I looked up at the man. He had short brown hair reaching his shoulders and onyx-colored eyes with visible creases. He wore a simple kimono with gray pants and he had a pissed-off look on his face. Let my grandson go before you lose that hand. Everyone stopped at Gramps' voice and before I knew it, Gramps had his sword at the man's throat. The man let me go and Hinata pulled me away from him before she punched the man in the nuts. He screamed and fell back, holding his balls. Dad. Father. Sasuke ran over, holding his side and the girl stood there shocked. I didn't want to fight Uchiha, Sasuke. Leave us be and there will be no more fighting between our clans. Don't take my works to heart and I'll make what the Kyuubi did look like a toddler having a fit. I looked at Gramps as the people around us backed away. Gramps, can you really do that? He looked down at me and smiled. Naruto, I fought the four-tailed Biju and lived to tell the tale. I may be getting on in years, but I'm still far from weak in my age. Not to mention the powers of our bloodline that made Madara Uchiha second-guess fighting our clan. I noticed the girl Uchiha girl looking at me. I smiled at her, and she looked away from her. Naruto-kun, we need to go. You know Hanabi will be after us if we're gone for too long. Hinata grabbed my hand and gave my hand a pull. Okay, I know she'll come hunting for us and her share of the buns. She smiled, then leaned into my side and rested her head on my shoulder. I noticed her looking at the Uchiha girl and she seemed to be staring back at her. Then she locked eyes with me. Why do I have a bad feeling? Chapter 5. Academy Years Part 1. Shanks Pav. I smiled as I sat on the porch and watched Naruto as he and Hinata started to help Hanabi with how to unlock and use chakra. I laughed as she sat on Naruto's lap and meditated like I had taught the two before her. How are they doing with her? I looked back and saw Tsunade as she walked over with a tray in hand. She set it down beside me and I smiled, seeing 3 glasses of water and 2 sake bottles. Where is Shizune? Tsunade sat down on the wood beside me. She took one of the sake bottles and opened it before she spoke. She's off at the hospital. She went to get some medical supplies for us. I know about how you Uzumaki who have haki train. Naruto is going to take a lot beating while training. I laughed before I took the other bottle and grabbed the cork with my teeth. I pulled the cork out, then spit it over and into the trash can. I smiled and started to drink. Nice shot. I nodded before I sighed and set the bottle down. I looked at Tsunade and I smiled as she leaned back, moving her hair out of her face. She ran it behind her ear and took a long sip from her bottle. I saw a flash of the young Tsunade I spent time with in Yuzu as a younger kid. I laughed and nodded my head. Tsunade looked away from the kids and at me, an eyebrow raised. What is funny, Shanks? I smiled as I looked at her. Just thinking of the past, Swand. Looking at you now, I can't help but remember the girl I met in the streets of Yuzu 34 years ago. To think that little teen-year-old girl I met at 12 would grow into a beauty and the great medic nin of our era. Tsunade laughed with a blush on her face. She stood up, then walked over and sat back down on my other side. She sat down beside me and sat her sake bottle down. She grabbed my sake bottle out of my hand and then sat it down. She put both of them away out of my reach. Shanks, can I ask you something? I blinked, not sure what she was up to. She leaned into my arm and grabbed my hand. I blinked a few times before she rested her head on my shoulder. Okay, what the hell is going on? Shanks, do you think Makino would be mad if I wanted to see you as more than a friend? Not right away, but maybe after a year or two. I blushed before I looked away from her. I laughed, a deep blush coming across my face. Well, actually, Makino was a woman who, well. Kami, this is hard to say. Tusand, Makino talked about getting you alone with just the two of us. I looked back at Tsunade, who looked confused, then it hit her. She turned red before she quickly grabbed the sake bottle. She turned the bottle up and started bounding the bottle. I laughed and nodded before I turned back and jumped, seeing Hinata standing there with a smile on her face. Tsunade stopped and we both looked at her. Her smile turned to a smirk at me before taking the tray with the glasses of water. She quickly walked back over to Hanabi and Naruto. Hanabi jumped up to take the water, but Hinata made her settle down. Before Hanabi could sit back in Naruto's lap, Hinata took her set and set the tray to the side, and I swear she was moving her butt around a little. Okay, forget the ninja graduation. She may jump him before that. I nodded before I got up and grabbed my sake bottle. I looked over and saw my grandson's red face before he grabbed Hinata's thighs and threw her up out of his lap. He vanished a second later. An annoyed Hinata activated her Byakugan. She looked around for a second before she took off into the woods. I started to down my bottle too. Third POV Academy years. First year. Naruto sat with Hinata in class and Ino sat on his other side. Over the last few weeks, Ino had seemed to take a more active role in Naruto's life after talking with her father about training. Hinata, for her part, didn't care for her right now. Ino had started cutting into her private training time with her Naruto-kun. In front of them was Sasuke Uchiha with 2 new fangirls on his sides. Behind them was Yui Uchiha and she was staring at the back of Naruto's head. Something about the boy caught her attention. As she stared, the door opened and in walked 2 men. The first man of average height and build. He has black hair that was kept in a ponytail, dark eyes and a scar that runs across the bridge of his nose. He wore the uniform of the ninja of Konoha. The other man had white shoulder-length hair with a slight hint of blue to it and green eyes. He wore the Konohan flak jacket standard attire and forehead protector like a bandana. They stood in front of the class before getting the class's attention. Okay class. The class, not counting Naruto and Yui. The tick mark appeared on Iruka's forehead before he used his original Jinjutsu. His head grew 5 times its regular sizes before he yelled. Shut up you shitey brats. The class shut up and gave Iruka and his partner their full attention. He smiled and started to take roll for the class as Naruto leaned back into his seat. Hinata leaned over and rested her head on his shoulder. Ino leaned in on Naruto's other side but didn't rest her head on his shoulder. Yui looked down at Hinata and Ino with an annoyed look on her face. Once roll call was taken, Iruka took the class outside to start the first class Taijutsu class. Parents were waiting outside and Naruto saw his gramps with Tsunade and Shizune beside him. Naruto saw Tsunade leaning against his gramps and smiled. Naruto wanted his gramps to make friends like he had. Naruto looked back at the class as the first two students stepped up. Most of the kids were civilian students but were glad to see their kids fight. But most acted like the fight was a brawl. Until Hinata came up and she faced off against Yui Uchiha. Naruto walked beside Iruka, knowing he might have to pull Hinata off Yui. Hiashi and Hinoka smiled as they watched their girl get ready to fight. Near them, the Uchiha elders and the mother of Yui and Sasuke Makoto Uchiha smiled as she watched her daughter walk into the ring. Beside her was Fugaku Uchiha. Their father smirked, knowing his daughter would beat the demon brass's little whore. Make the hand sigh. Hinata and Yui did as they were told. Hajime. Hinata dropped into her mixed stance and Yui stood in a Muay Thai stance. Iruka looked at Hinata with a raised eyebrow. She not using the gentle fist. She's using her original mixed fighting style. My gramps and I helped her make it. But getting hit hurts like crazy. And if she using the shockwave attacks it's all but invincible. Really? Naruto nodded as Yui jumped at Hinata with her right arm cocked back. Hinata smirked, then vanished and appeared beside Yui. Hinata landed a hard kick into her side and she sent her flying outside of the ring. Yui slammed back into a tree across the field. She fell down to the ground, coughing and holding her side. Hinata bowed towards Yui before Tsunade ran over and grabbed Yui with Makoto close behind. Tsunade quickly picked her up and walked back over to the parents. Shanks pulled his cloak off and laid it down on the ground. Tsunade laid her down on the cloak and started to treat her. After she was healed, Iruka called Naruto and Sasuke to the ring. Fugaku was seething as he looked at his son, expecting him to beat that damn brat. Naruto smirked as Sasuke got into the interceptor fist stance. Fugaku smiled, knowing the fighting style he taught his son would help him beat the brat. But, he dropped into a stance that stopped Fugaku's arrogant thoughts. He was watched as Naruto dropped into the Crimson Maelstrom stance. Naruto smiled as he leaned forward, his hands at his sides, fist clenched like he was readying to draw swords. His feet were spread wide with his right leg pulled back. I'm on team, I think I'll kick you in the face like I did at Bakery. Try it, you low-class clan freak. Make the hand sigh. Naruto moved his right hand and made the hand sigh, but Sasuke spat on the ground. Iruka frowned and would talk to him about proper etiquette later. Hajime. Sasuke jumped forward, wanting to put Naruto in his place and show them all the might of the elite Uchiha clan. Naruto looked at him bored before he closed his eyes and started to use his observation haki. Naruto sensed Sasuke's emotions, which were like a storm, but the emotion he felt the most was anger. No, rage was the better word. Naruto dodged a punch and sidestepped a kick. You're not calm, Sasuke. Thanks to my bloodline I can sense not only your emotions, but your presence and intentions. Observation haki may not copy jutsu, but it can let me see all your moves before you make them. Naruto slid his feet as Sasuke tried another kick. Naruto got behind him, the elbow at the back of Sasuke's head. Sasuke flew down and his face crashed down into the dirt. Naruto felt Sasuke's anger raising and he jumped, dodging another kick from the downed Sasuke. Naruto landed on his back, making Sasuke yell out in pain. Gramps also told me at the level he is, he can do what your clan's Sharingan only rumored to. See into the future even if it is a 10-second or so. I can't wait to get to that level to bad the other abilities my bloodline doesn't match up to my observation yet. I'd love to use my king's power and see how strong your willpower is. Or use armament haki to just stand there and let you break your arms and legs against my blocks. Naruto felt the shock in all the parents and his classmates. When Naruto finished the little speech, he heel kicked Sasuke hard in the side of the head, knocking him out. Naruto walked off the down Uchiha and opened his eyes before being tackled by an overhappy Hanabi. Hanabi took Naruto to the ground and sat on his stomach as she talked. Naruto-kun. That was incredible, you and Sis put the Uchiha clan in their place today as the dead last of this year. Naruto laughed a little before Hinata and Ino grabbed Hanabi. They pulled her off Naruto, kicking and screaming for Naruto-kun to help her. Shanks was laughing hard and Tsunade punched his side. She and Shizune laughed with him. All the parents but Fugaku, as his rage kept him silent. Shanks pav. I laughed as I watched my grandson as his little fan club fought over his attention. I stopped a second later, put my hand on Fugaku's shoulder and kept him where he was. I don't need my haki to know you're beyond mad, Fugaku. But, if you take one step towards my grandson, I'll have to hurt you real bad. I felt him shake and I felt the fear run through him. Shanks, be nice, I'm sure Fugaku isn't so foolish that he'd try something with all the clan heads around. I nodded as Tsunade returned to my side with my cloak in her arms. I took my cloak back and threw it over my shoulders. Tsunade leaned back into my side and I smiled and rested my arm on my sword. Tsunade laughed before she laid her left arm onto my arm. I smiled, not shying away from her touch. I turned my hand and interlocked our hands. Tsunade smiled as the parents around us started to mutter and I felt the jealousy of the men around me. Lucky bastard. I laughed at the voice of a man from behind me. I watched the Sasu kid get healed by Shizune. Hey, Shanks-kun, since we got most of the clan heads here, why don't we all talk? Before I could respond, an Anbu appeared in front of us on a knee. All the ninjas around us looked at her. Lady Tsunade and Lord Shanks, Lord Hokage and Sir Jiraiya would like a word with you in the Hokage Tower. Tsunade suddenly tightened her grip on my hand before she smiled. I felt a chill run down my spine after I saw that smile. Oh Kami, I hope I can get away fast enough if she ever gets this mad at me. Jiraiya, Hiruzen, you two put this off for years. I hope you two are ready. Come on, Shanks-kun. I have a few beating to hand out. Everyone quickly cleared a path and a few women told her to beat the pervert to death. I was a little confused as she pulled me off the school grounds. She let my hand go and wrapped her arm around mine. Shanks, I'm going to shunshin us to the Hokage Tower. Wait. She stopped and I smiled before I pulled out one of Minato Hiraishin kunai. She looked at me, shocked as she started to explain. I'm a seal master, remember Haim? I have the Hiraishin note so it didn't take me long and once I get the few flaws with the Hiraishin and the Rasengan fixed, I plan to teach Naruto in his last year of the academy. She smiled before she grabbed my collar and pulled me to face level. She let go of my collar and wrapped her arm around my neck. She pressed her lips to mine. I wrapped my arm around her lower back and acted the seal to take us to the mark I left in the Hokage office last time I was there. I felt a rush of air and nothing under my feet for a second, then I felt the ground return. Tsunade broke our kiss and I looked at a shocked Hokage and another ma'am. I looked at him and realized this must be Jiraiya. He had waist-length spiky white hair tied back into a ponytail with two shoulder-length bangs framing his face. There were red lines under his eyes that extended further down his face, going all the way to the bottom. He developed wrinkles around the corners of his mouth and a wart on the side of his nose. I looked at his attire and saw a short green shirt, kimono, and matching pants, under which it looked like he wore mesh armor that was visible at his wrists and ankles. He also wore handguards and a black belt. On his chest was a red haori with two yellow circles on each side. On his lower back was a large scroll. I looked back at his face. He had a horned forehead protector with a kanji for oil. His face grew mad as he looked at me. Who are you and why do you know the Hiraishin and why is Tsunade clinging to you? I blinked before spinning the Hiraishin kunai on my finger. Well, your godson's mother was my daughter and she and her husband wasn't a full-fledged seal master by Uzumaki standards. It took me about 2 months to learn this and the Rasengan. But, that aside, I think it's about time I gave you the beating you own for abandoning my grandson. As for Tsunade, she's my Tsunade Haim now. She and her student Shizune have been living and raising Naruto with me for the last year. And I'm getting my hits in too. His face paled as Tsunade cracked her knuckles as I summoned a wooden sword. He dropped to his knees and clasped his hands together. Wait. Please. I can explain why I wasn't here. How bad could he have been treated? We stopped and I could feel Tsun's rage coming off in waves. Mine own rage wasn't much better and I clenched my hand around the handle of my wooden sword before I used my armament haki on the wood. It turned red for a second before fading to a shiny, smooth black sword. How bad? I took a step, cracking and breaking the floor under my feet. Tsunade slammed her foot onto the floor, breaking it under her foot. My grandson had to dig through trash to find food and clothes. He had to sleep in alleyways and run from villagers who wanted to kill him for the actions of that fucking fool of a father of his. I raised my haki-covered sword and my conqueror's haki flared around the sword. Tsunade pulled his fist back, visible chakra around her fist and forearm. Mercy. Sorry, we're out of mercy. All we have is unyielding rage. Tsunade punched him in the face and he crashed into the wall. His face looked like it was almost caved in. I swung my sword down and sent an attack at him. The haki-infused attack slammed into his chest and broke down the wall. An eruption of air blew out of the room and he flew through the air for a few seconds before falling to the street. He rolled along the street before crashing into the side of a building. We seethed before I turned face and pointed the end of the wooden sword at the swollen face of the man. I blinked, then looked back at the street and saw a half-shattered stone toad on the side of the building. It was broken and cracked all around it. Well, damn, I've never seen someone manage a substitution jutsu as I hit them. 20 Anbu appeared in the room, but Hiruzen finally spoke up. Halt Anbu. You all knew how this could go. Please just get the private contract ready to repair the building again. Tsunade looked at Hiruzen and then back at me before I resealed my weapon. I smirked before I rested my arm on my sword. Danzo and the elders demanded I hand over the scroll of mine and Naruto's clan and give them half the wealth I brought with me. Your sensei here tried to convince me to do it as well. Tsunade looked at Hiruzen, making him sweat. Sensei, I know you didn't try to force a clan god give up private funds right and scrolls. Her sweet tone sent a shiver down the aged Hokage's spine. I summoned a rolling pin remembering his saying how his wife would swing one at him for being stupid. I covered it in haki and Tsunade thanked me before taking a step toward him. She hit it into her offhand a few times before he got on his knees in front of his desk, begging for forgiveness. Please, you'd never understand, they wouldn't shut up about it all. They kept telling me that they would do something to Naruto so he wouldn't be allowed to go to the second year. I just wanted everything to be peaceful like your grandfather wanted. Tsunade stopped for a second before she nodded and tapped the rolling pin on his desk. She smiled and then nodded as she looked at him. Okay, well, let it go this time if you make a promise to us. I saw the life in his eyes return. Anything? Tsunade smiled as she looked at him and I couldn't help but wonder what she was thinking. My little Naruto gets to be on a team with his little friend. Hinata and Yui Uchiha, those two will keep other in check and Hinata is all but violent with almost everyone else. He smiled and nodded his head. I promise. Tsunade smiled before she turned and walked back over to Jiraiya, a smile on her face. Third person Pav's second year. After the first year, it was clear Naruto and Hinata, along with Ino, provided they were at the top of the new class. Anko, Ino, and Hanabi started to train with Shanks and Naruto. Yui would watch them from time to time and learn from watching them. In class, the three ruled, much to Sasuke's ire. Naruto, Hinata, and Ino consistently scored higher in all areas than the two Uchiha twins. But Yui didn't seem to care about that. But she seemed more annoyed that she couldn't get close to Naruto. She wanted to know how that bloodline worked too. She wanted to train with him. She wanted to sit next to him and rest her head on his shoulder. She was a strong kunoichi too and she wanted Naruto to see that. But every time they sparred, she was up against Hinata. She glared at the back of Hinata's head before the lunch bell rang. Yui. Yui looked away from the back of Hinata's head and glared at her brother. He flinched at his sister's glare and moved a little in his seat. He smirked and waved for her to come closer. She raised an eyebrow before she got up and walked over. She leaned on the desk and looked at her brother. What? Her tone sounded annoyed as she stared at Sasuke. He smiled before he looked at Naruto. I got a group of Uchiha and we're going to give him the beating he's due for humiliating our clan. Once he's dead we're going after his bitches and kill them all. Yui's mind filled with the images of a dead Naruto and a sense of anger and sadness washed over in waves. Before she knew what was going on, she felt something change in her before she pulled her arm back with an open hand. The sound of the slap stopped everyone in the room. Everyone looked back and saw Sasuke holding his cheek. Sasuke looked back at his sister, shocked since she'd never slapped him before. Before he could react, Yui grabbed Sasuke's shirt, pulled him out of his seat, and got in his face. But, to his shock and horror, Sasuke meets a pair of one-tomo Sharingan eyes. If you or anyone touches Naruto-kun or tries to hurt him, Sasuke, the whole clan, won't stop me from getting to you. Sasuke nodded sacred as he looked at his sister. Yui shoved him back and he slammed into the desk behind him. Once she calmed down, she realized she had yelled all that out. Her Sharingan faded before she felt some Kai in the room. Yui slowly turned around and saw two cold stares from Hinata and Ino. Haruka and Mizuki walked in with some of the fourth-year students. After using his big head jutsu to shut up the kids. Anko smiled as she looked at Naruto and Naruto blushed as he looked at her open overcoat. Okay, everyone, today we're going to have you all paired up with a fourth year for a weekend training trip. You'll be staying in the woods around the village. This is something new we wanted to try this year. Now we're going to let the upperclassmen pick who they want. Now we're going to start with Anko Mitarashi. I call the Gaki. Anko yelled out before using an 8-foot white snake to mark her favorite Gaki. The snake bowled up on top of Naruto's lap. Ino jumped away, scared of the snake. Hinata backed away a little, not liking the snake either. Naruto laughed before pulling his cloak and shirt to the side. Everyone saw he had muscles under the layer and Hinata, Ino, Yui, and Anko blushed as they saw the start of a set of abs and pectorals. The snake flicked its tongue a few times before it unrolled itself, then slid up Naruto's chest and into his clothes. He closed his cloak and you could see the snake moving around before its head popped out of his collar. It rested its head on the side of Naruto's neck and collar. Naruto laughed and patted the snake's head. It licked his hand a few times before class started back up. Anko looked shocked as she looked at her only white snake. Damn, Naga doesn't even does that with me. She just clings to stuff for heat, but she's cuddling up to him. Naruto leaned back, and the now-named Naga moved her head and rested her chin on Naruto's shoulder and looked at Hinata with a set of blue eyes. She flicked her tongue a few times before closing her eyes. The rest of the class took a student, but one was left over. Yui wasn't picked by an upperclassman. Once word got out, the Uchiha clan had lost after a decade of dominance. Many students and citizens of Konoha were outraged that the demon Brad and his whore made it so the younger generation won't go near the two Uchiha in the academy, thinking them weak. I'm sorry Yui, but since you weren't picked I'll have to place you. Yes sir. Iruka looked down at the papers on his desk. Okay, let's see you're a forward fighter from your test scores and formal matches. Anko. You and Naruto are both forward fighters, would you mind taking her too? I'll see to it the Hokage will add some extra pay to the D rank pay you all were getting. Anko looked annoyed, wanting to spend some alone time with the boy who caught her eye. Naruto looked at Anko and knew what was about to come out of her mouth. Anko-chan, if you do this I'll pay for your dango for the next week. A smile formed on Anko's face before jumping at Naruto. She pulled him over the desk and hugged him, making Naga hiss at the pressure on her body. Aki. Have I ever told you I love you? Naruto tried to push her face away from his. Yeah, every time I buy you dango. With all eyes on Naruto, the girls all looked ready to rip Anko off him. Anko crushed Naruto's face into her young C-cup breast. She smiled as she looked at Hinata and then Ino. Looks like I get to have my time with Gaki. Anko let him go before grabbing the back of his cloak. Yui, meet us at the Uzumaki compound in 2 hours. Gaki, it's dango time. Anko, wait. Shut up, spiky head. Anko dragged a yelling Naruto and a hissing Naga out the door. Naruto-kun. Hinata ran out after them with Ino and Yui close behind. Iruka sighed and quickly wrote that Anko dragged Naruto away with Naruto's 3 fangirls running after them. Iruka looked back to see a raging Sasuke Uchiha and a pissed-off-looking Kiba in Yazuka. Okay, maybe I should look into that too. Kiba was enraged that his females chased after another male. Sasuke was angry as he watched his sister run out after the dope that humiliated him. Naruto pov 20 minutes later. I sighed as I chewed on a dango stick as I planned my escape from the 4 girls around me. Anko had sat in front of the flaps and Hinata sat down on my right with her head on my shoulder, chewing on a dango stick herself. I looked to my right and saw Yui sitting beside me, with Ino glaring at her. Can't soar out of this one. I've never done it in a crowded building. With Hinata right beside me, she's got plenty of time to grab me. I heard a hiss and looked down to see Naga as she moved around, then poked her head out of the front of my cloak. Hinata and Yui both moved away as she snatched a dango stick and tried to eat it, stick and all. I grabbed the stick for her and she pulled the 3 dango off before slipping back into my cloak. I felt her run her head on the side of my chest. Anko, please get that snake off my Naruto-kun. Hinata yelled and Anko sighed before taking a sip of her tea. Fine, Gaki, you need to open your cloak a little. I grabbed my cloak and opened it before I looked down at my chest. I saw her blue eyes looking up at me for a second before Anko touched her. She turned fast and bit her arm. Ah fuck. Naga hissed at Anko again before turning her head and resting it on my chest again. Oh, great, my only Iwakuni has become attached to the Gaki. Naga, I better have a dry bite. She seemed to ignore me as she slid up my chest before she moved out of my collar and wrapped her body around my neck. She looked at Hinata again. She flicked her tongue a few more times before moving down my chest and moving towards Hinata. She hit the wall. As Naga slid up her stomach, the other half of her body fell out of my cloak. Naga slid up to her chest and I noticed she slid between Hinata's already noticeable breasts. We were only pre-teens, but it was clear she was going to be a beauty like Gramps when we graduated at 16. Naga got up to Hinata's face and flicked her tongue on her cheek a few times before Anko grabbed her at the neck. Got her. Naga hissed as she wrapped her body around Anko's arm. Naruto, Yui, you two go get ready. Like I said, meet me at the Uzumaki compound. Seeing my chance, I jumped over the table and ran for the door. Naruto-kun, wait. I stopped at the door and looked at Yui, who was close behind. Ino was tied to her seat by wires and with Hinata. I paled as I saw Hinata's face start to turn red with anger. I grabbed Yui's arm and quickly took off at a run. Then Naruto-kun. Hinata is mad, we need to run. If she gets her hands on us, we'll feel it for a week. I saw the fear in her eyes and we started to run fast. Third person Pav. Shanks watched Naruto as we ran around the house, Ima sitting with Yui as she drank so green tea. He laughed as he leaned back into the couch, Tsunade resting on his side with his good arm wrapped around her. Shizune walked back into the living room with her own cup of green tea. She sat down on Shanks' offside as Naruto finally stopped and looked at the door. Shanks started to laugh as he felt the ball of rage come to the house fast. Gee Gramps. Shanks laughed a little more before he nodded his head. You know I'm not going to try and stop her. Naruto, she's your little friend, so run or take the beating you have coming. Tsunade laughed as Naruto looked at Shanks with sweat running down his face. Naruto-kun. The rage-filled yell of Hinata could be heard from the Hokage tower. Hiruzen shivered before a male scream followed it a few seconds later. I hope that wasn't from the Uzumaki compound. Or the Hyuga compound. I don't need Hiashi to try and kill Naruto. Then again, I don't need Fugaku or Inoichi trying to kill him after the letter I got from Iruka. The village hidden in the leaves was treated to the sight, and Naruto Uzumaki, the heir to the Uzumaki clan, ran with Yuya Uchiha in his arms. Behind him, trying to keep up with him, was an equally scared Anko with a furious Hinata Hyuga close behind, her hands covered in chakra. Baki, call off, you damn girlfriend. Ignoring her, Naruto ran into the Hyuga compound, hoping to run into Hiashi or Hinoka. Naruto knew if he found one of them, he'd be saved. Naruto smiled as he ran down the road and saw Hinoka with Hanabi sitting beside her at an outside table at a tea shop. Lady Hinoka. Naruto yelled his lungs out, making all the Hyuga look at him. Hinoka stood up back and turned, already guessing Hinata was chasing after her love interest again. Hinoka blinked as she looked at Uchiha Yui in his arms. She saw the bags on Anko and Yui's backs. Sorry, Lady Hinoka. Naruto and Anko ran behind her and down the street. Hinoka grabbed Hinata's shoulder as she tried to run by her. Hinata, stop chasing the poor boy like this before you chase him off for good. Hinata stopped dead after hearing her mother's words. She slumped as she watched her love turn the corner with another girl in his arms. Want to talk about it, honey? I want to be the only girl he carries like that. Hinoka sighed before she ran a hand down her daughter's back before Hanabi spoke up. Hey sis, like strong girls like his gramps, right? Why not invite him to the clan tournament the village is hosting when your class graduates? A smile formed on Hinata's face after hearing that. That right. The clans wanted to see the new gen in class skill every year. I can show Yui and Ino where they stand in pecking order. Hinoka and Hanabi blinked, and before Hinoka could stop her, Hinata rushed off to find her upperclassmen. Mother, what did I just start? A slightly scared Hanabi asked as her mother felt a pit of fear creep up her spine. I don't know, and that scares me. I'll see if Lord Shanks and your father can stop this. Naruto Path 3 hours later. I smiled as I sat on the side of the tree as Anko and Yui tried their hand at tree walking. Anko was going better than Yui since she couldn't get more than a few steps up. You could tell she hadn't been trained much. I sighed before I stood up and walked down the tree as Yui glared at her tree. Yui. She looked over at me, and I smiled as I looked at her. Yes, Naruto-kun. I smiled before I walked up beside her. I've been watching you, Yui. You're putting too much chakra on the bottom of your feet. Here, try walking up with me. I grabbed her hand, and she blushed before I put my foot on the tree trunk. I think of the calm and flat surface of the water. It helps to settle my mind and makes it easy to focus on a task. She smiled and nodded before she put a foot on the trunk next to mine. Okay, let's try this again. She put her other foot on the trunk and I saw she was a bit shaky, but she smiled. I stepped on the trunk and we slowly started to walk up. When we reached the middle of the tree, I let her hand go and she smiled at me before starting to go higher. I nodded before I felt a chill run down my spine. I leaned my head back and saw Anko glaring at her tree as she started to get up. I laughed before I jumped off the tree and landed on the ground. I walked over to her as she kicked the tree, breaking the bark. Damn it. I smiled as I stopped behind her. Anko. She turned and glared at me. I smirked as I looked at her and unsealed a box from the dango stand. She smiled and started to reach for the box. I laughed and she looked at me. I jumped above her and quickly walked up the tree. Hey. I sat down on the low branch but was still 12 feet off the ground. I stabbed 2 kunai and set the box on them. The hell, Gaki. I smiled as I leaned back into the tree. Anko, I've seen you train. You rely on your brute force too much while you train with Tusen's clones. Plus, you never take part in the chakra control or any training to build up your chakra reserves. Tree walking is a basic way to do that. Now, this dango and my promise to do one thing you want me to do, but. She raised an eyebrow as she looked at me. But. I smiled as I looked at her. The scroll kept the dango warm. And if you don't get up here it will get cold. She smirked before she started up. I smiled down at her as she slowly walked up the trunk. She got a few steps from it before her foot slipped. I panicked before I threw myself off the branch and grabbed her arm. I pulled her into my arms and I reinforced my back. I slammed back to the ground with Anko held in my arms. I coughed and groaned before Anko sat up on my crotch. Naruto, are you okay? I laughed as I leaned up on my elbows and looked at her. Damn Anko, I take a fail for you and now you call me by my name. She frowned before she grabbed my collar and glared into my eyes. Damn, Naruto. Get off him. I heard Yui roar and I ducked down as she tackled Anko off me. I cleaned up and watched them roll around until Anko pinned her. Anko was taller and more robust, so it wasn't hard for her to hold Yui down. Hey. Anko and Yui both glared at me. Stay out of this. She needs to know she's touching someone else, man. Shut up, Yui. Naruto isn't yours. As far as he's concerned, he don't have a damn girl right now. He's free game. I blinked as I looked at the two as they fighting about me having a girlfriend. I frowned before I hardened my resolve. I stood up, walked over to them, and grabbed Anko's shoulder and the back of her overcoat. I pulled her up and off of Yui, surprising them both. Everyone knew I would never touch a woman or girl. So me ripping Anko off of Yui shocked them both. I dragged the stunned Anko over to the tree and sat her down. I pulled a blunt kunai out and threw it at my two other kunai. It knocked one of them out and the dango box fell down. I caught it before I walked away from the two and sat down with my back to the two of them. Then Naruto-kun. Hey Gaki, you okay? I opened the box and picked up a dango stick. I smirked, finally getting some heat off my back and seeing my chance to make a stand. You two act like I don't have a say in who I want as a girlfriend. I don't appreciate being talked about like I'm an object. I took a bite from the now cold dango stick. I left them in silence for a moment before I spoke again. I do care for you two and Ino almost as much as I Hinata and Hanabi. You two are some of the few people who have looked at me with no anger or hate. I'm grateful for that. But I want to be left alone for the rest of the day. The way you two just acted was like you were kids who were told no about something. I'm sick of the four of you acting like I'm an object and chasing after me or clinging to me in Hinata's case. I frowned before I finished the stick and bit the stick between my teeth. Anko looked hurt and Yui looked away. I stood up, then walked over and set the dango box on the ground between them. Jigaki. I looked at Anko and she flinched when I stared at her with a cold look. I wanted them to know I wanted the fighting and chasing to stop and I needed a good time to do this with Hinata too, but starting this meant progress. I'm starting this talk with you two. It stops here and now. You two are going to share the other two dango sticks and make peace here. I looked over at Yui and she flinched again as she tried to look me in the eye. Yui, I want you either join in our training at home or stop hiding in the damn trees watching like a stalker. She blushed and looked down at her feet before she nodded. She sniffed a few times before she spoke. Okay, Naruto-kun. I'll be a good girl. I felt myself blush and sighed before I turned my back on them, my face still warm. I'm going to go and get some fresh meat, you two make peace. I jumped off, leaving the two behind me. Chapter 6. Shanks' paw that night. I sighed as I leaned against a tree, looking down at Naruto as he sat away at his own small fire. Damn, I felt a small spike of his haki and come all the way out here for nothing. I rested my arm back on my sword and nodded before I turned, feeling the Anbu around me. I didn't feel any hate toward Naruto or Anko. Well, I guess it's okay to leave them be for now. I turned and stopped when I felt a dozen life energies vanish. I looked back to the village and nodded before I used the Hiruzen again. I appeared in the center of the village and felt around again. 4 more vanished. The Uchiha compound. I jumped, heading for the Uchiha compound. Lord Shanks. I looked back as I jumped across a rooftop. I stopped just outside the Uchiha compound as more plain mask Anbu surrounded me with swords drawn. I don't have time for all of you. I blasted them all with my Conqueror's haki. They all dropped and I felt another 4 groups pass out. Before I moved on, I pulled out a live body sealing scroll and grabbed the closest Anbu to me. I saw a seal on the back of his neck and frowned. I slammed an anti on the back of his neck. It would deactivate all the seals on his body. I sealed his body inside the scroll before I jumped over the wall of the Uchiha compound and stopped seeing the bodies. I looked around and reached out with my observation haki. I felt maybe 50 of the 200 Uchiha were gone. I felt around and smiled as I sensed 2 powerful chakra signatures coming toward me. Let's get some backup. I pulled out a red enemy flare. I pulled a string in my teeth and sent a red flare into the air. Lord Shanks. I turned and saw Sasuke's and Yui's mother with a few other Uchiha Kunoichi with blood on her clothes and a large group of kids. She had a sword in her hand. I did a quick count and she had 30 kids and 6 other Kunoichis. 2 in the back were wounded and I frowned. Before I could respond, Hiruzen appeared with 30 Anbu around him. What is going here, Shanks? Someone is killing the Uchiha. I sensed 2 powerful chakra signatures come my way before they call out to me. They vanished after that. My guess the reinforcement flare made it seem like more trouble than they were ready for. Hiruzen nodded before he looked at the Anbu. Spread out and get a count of the survivors. They vanished and I sighed before I looked back and saw that she was looking around. Are you okay? She nodded as she looked at me. My sons weren't home. I don't know where they are. I frowned before nodding. I created a shadow clone and he nodded before he jumped off. My clone will look for Sasuke and I think your other son was Itachi, right? Yes, thank you, Lord Shanks. I nodded before I waved for them to follow me. Come on, Tsunade and Shizune are at home and I have a powerful barrier around my clan compound. Lady Mikoto, I think it is best if you go with him. Lord Shank's seals never fail and he's as strong as Cage. I nodded to Hiruzen before we started to move. Mikoto walked up beside me and I saw she had a dark look in her eyes. I can't just leave her be like thing. I cleared my throat, getting her attention. When they deal with everything I'll take some time to help set up a barrier around the Uchiha compound or I can talk with the council about letting your clan move to a safer part of the village. She smiled up at me. Thank you for your help Lord Shanks. I nodded as we walked down the street. I stopped when I sensed one of the signatures appeared behind us. I turned, drawing my sword as a Kunoichi blocked a sword stick with a masked man. I caught my sword in haki and jumped at him. Move. The barrier is down. Tell Tsunade to activate the barrier. They did as I told them as the masked man jumped back. I heard them start to run and I blocked the man's path. He laughed before he jumped at me with his sword raised to stab at me. I threw my sword up as he thrusted his sword forward. I smiled when my sword broke his in two. I caught at my foot then kicked him hard in the ribs. I felt his lower ribs give way before he flew back from the impact. He skipped over the ground a few times before he slammed into the side of a building. Madara. I looked up and saw another Uchiha holding a badly bleeding arm. I felt my shadow clones dispel and I tightened my grip on my sword as I looked at him. You little bastard. You turned on your own clan. You murdered your own father. He frowned as he looked at me. Lord Shanks, you know nothing of what happened tonight. I'm only glad my younger sister and brother didn't have to see this. I frowned before a swirl sucked him and I blinked before I looked back at the man I just kicked. He swirled away and I frowned before I remembered the kids. I Hiruzen into the compound and I saw Tsunade and Shizune treating a few of the kids. I saw a dog masked Anbu with a woman cat masked Anbu standing inside the compound. I ran over to them. They looked at me as I sheathed my sword. You too, I encountered one of the attacks. One was Itachi Uchiha and the other was a man in a black cloak with an orange swirl mask. I need one of you to talk that message to Lord Hokage. The dog nodded his head. I'll be back face cat. He shunshin away and I looked over to Tsunade. She looked at Shanks as she stood up from the kid sitting on the edge of the porch. Haim. She looked at me and quickly ran over to me. She held onto the back of my cape. I wrapped my arm around her. These are kids. What kind of monster attacks kids? I frowned, then laughed a little. Well, I encountered one of those monsters. I managed to break his lower ribs before he got away from me. She laughed a little before she turned her head and looked at the kids again. Luckily I didn't get my hands on him. I nodded and patted her back before Dog reappeared. Mikoto walked up beside us and put a hand on my arm. I felt Tsunade tighten her arms around me. Lord Third thanked you for the information Lord Shanks. But, the Shinobi Council has called for a meeting. Lady Tsunade, I was told you were to remain here to act as a deterrent on another attack. Squad of elite Anbu have taken up positions around the compound to protect the survivors taking Shither here. Lady Mikoto, as your husband is dead you must take back the seat of head of the clan. Mikoto nodded before Tsunade gave me a quick kiss on my lips before I patted Mikoto's shoulder. She looked up at me and I smiled. Don't worry. I will be more than happy to add the seals first thing tomorrow morning. A small smile graced her face as she looked up at me. Thank you Lord Shanks. Dog grabbed our shoulders and shunshin us into the council room. Mikoto quickly walked over to the Shinobi Council seats. I walked over and leaned on the wall before I pulled the body scroll out. Lord Shanks, what do you have there? I smiled as I looked at Danzo after he spoke to me. He looked a little worried as he looked at me. You'll see you old plain masked warhawk once the Hokage arrives. His visible eye opened and before it narrowed, my seal to blocking control activated on my right bicep. I looked right at Danzo and spoke in a dark tone in my voice. Whoever is trying to control my mind, I have a level 10 mental attacking blocking seal on mine and everyone in my house. A deep frown crossed Danzo's face before my seal was deactivated. I smiled as I tapped the scroll on my thigh while I looked at Danzo with a smile on my face. He only glared back at me. A few moments passed before Hiruzen walked in, still in his battle gear, with a look that could kill. He walked over to his desk and sat down in his chair, giving off a massive amount of kai as he glared at Danzo. I laughed as he looked at Danzo as he sweated. Lord Shanks. I looked away from Danzo and laughed as I looked fully at his rage-filled eyes of Hiruzen as he looked at Danzo. He glared at him for a moment longer before I threw the scroll over to him. Hiruzen caught the scroll and looked at me. A live body sealing scroll. I caught a plain mask Anbu and put a powerful deactivation seal on the man after seeing a seal on the back of his neck. It forcibly shuts down all the seals on a body. The group he was with tried to stop me from getting into the Uchiha compound when I felt the life forces start to disappear. See, Ibiki will have a lot of fun with this one. I looked back to see all the elders sweating as they looked between Hiruzen and me. I suggest you, I, or Tsunade be there. I have a feeling someone will try something. So, does anyone know the casualties of the Uchiha clan? Hiruzen sighed as he leaned back into his chair. Yes, all the Uchiha with fully matured Sharingan were killed. All the elemental masters were killed as well. As well had the former head of the clan Fugaku Uchiha and his eye were taken. I blinked and was a little shaken at that. His eyes were taken. I snapped, sacring everyone and slammed my fist into the wall and sent spider web cracks on the wall. I ignored their look and Tsum as she tried to talk to me. You crimson-eyed bastard, you turn on your own and steal your father's eyes. Tsum fell silent and I looked back at Hiruzen. The aged man flinched a little as I looked at him. When he breaking I want names. Everyone involved will feel the wrath of the Uzumaki elder that killed the former second Raikage and nearly the third Raikage. I slaughtered more than 600 ninjas that day Hiruzen. Whoever planned this they attacked the children too. With everything they'd done tonight, it will look like child's play when I get my hand on them. I saw everyone but Hiruzen shake in fear as I just let my anger and rage fill the air. The civilian had passed and the clan head looked wholly terrified, but when I looked at Tsum and Makoto, I saw faint blushes on their faces as they shook. Naruto's POV 2 days later. I walked in front of Anko and Yui. I looked at them out of the corner of my eye. They looked worried as they looked at me. I sighed before I stopped. I walked back onto the main road to the village. I'd spent the last 2 days not really speaking to the two of them outside of training. I leaned on a tree with my arms and looked at the two. They stopped as they looked at me. I know I've been cold but it was needed. I'm sick of being jumped on or dragged around by my collar. Plus, the fact being spied on isn't fun either. I looked at Anko and she laughed as she rubbed the back of her head. Yui blushed as she looked the other way. Yeah, we're bad about those two things. I nodded as I looked at Anko. But, none of you are as bad as Hinata when she gets clingy. Running from her isn't easy either. They laughed a little and I frowned and sighed, resting my arm on the now destroyed swords. I was glad to finally be tall enough to wear them on my side. I glared at Yui and tapped my melted swords. She laughed as she looked at me. Yeah, sorry I didn't mean to fireball them. I huffed before I stood up. If I had enough talent with armament haki I could have coated my swords, they'd have been fine. I need new swords since I only just started to learn ninjutsu, so all I have is my taijutsu and what little armament haki I can use. I heard Anko laugh a little as we started to walk again. Please, your Crimson Maelstrom Fist has quickly become a very powerful and coveted style. A lot of my class has tried to get your gramps to teach them. Some shinobi and civilian clans are also trying to get him to teach their heirs. I laughed as we walked. Yeah, Gramps doesn't seem to want to have to deal with many people around the village. I think the only ones he really deals with besides us, Tsunade and Shizune Gramps, only talk to Jiji and Tsum. We walked up the road and I sighed as I walked. I stopped as we neared the gate. Naruto-kun. I slowly started to move for the tree line. Naruto-kun. I jumped up, stuck to the tree, and looked down at an annoyed Hinata and a beaten and bruised fourth-year girl. I sighed before glaring at Hinata before she could jump up to me. She stopped and blinked as she looked at me. Then Naruto-kun. I took a deep breath, then jumped down and landed a few feet away from her. Hinata, I already got onto Yui and Anko for what they've been doing. I'm sick of being treated like a kami-damn object. Hinata flinched since I'd never yelled at her before. Then a blush crossed her face as she looked up at me. I huffed before I jumped away from them all. Naruto-kun, wait, please. I ignored Hinata's yell as I tree jumped like Gramps had shown me. I reached the wall after a few minutes but stopped, then sensed someone come up fast. I turned in the air and slammed into the tree trunk with a kunai in hand. I looked back and saw a plain masked Anbu. I could sense him, but he had no emotions to him. Naruto Uzumaki, please come with me. I narrowed my eyes as I looked at the man. I flared my haki and covered both hands in armament haki. The knuckles and the tops of my fingers on both hands flashed red and faded to black as I looked at him. No thanks. I pulled another kunai when he reached for his sword. I jumped at him as he pulled his sword. I landed below him and blocked a sword strike. I used Soru and got behind him. I punched him in the back hard. I felt his under armor give way as he was thrown to the ground. He slammed down and I jumped down, aiming for his back. I slammed a knee into his back and he cried out before I spun a kunai and buried the back end of my kunai into the back of his neck. He passed out and I sighed. Naruto. I looked to the side and saw Gramps and Swan coming fast. I stood up and looked at them as they rushed up. Gramps looked shocked as he looked down at me. Naruto, your eyes. I blinked as I looked at Gramps, then looked into my kunai. I saw my eyes were still blue, but had a slit instead of a circle. What is going on with my eyes? I looked back at Gramps as I felt Hinata and the others catching up fast. Gramps looked worried as he looked at me. Naruto, you leave with Tsunade. I feel the others coming, so get going. I nodded before I holstered my other kunai before we took off. As I followed behind Tsunade, I felt Hinata still closing in on us. I sighed, knowing she would keep chasing me if I didn't turn and face her. Tsunade seems Hinata got past Gramps and she's catching up fast. Tsunade turned her head and nodded as we jumped to the ground. A minute or so later, I watch her burst through the trees. He looked at me with a panicked look on her face. Naruto-kun. She quickly rushed over and pulled me into a tight hug. I pushed off and back and she looked me in the eye and gasped as she looked at my eyes. Naruto-kun, your eyes. If Gramps was worried about this, I have to come up with something. I should have known this would make her panic. In my panic, I came up with a lie. Don't worry. It seems to be part of my haki abilities. Something to do with my observation, haki. Hinata calmed down at that and I felt Tsunade relax as she nodded. Okay, Naruto-kun. But, why did you yell at me? I mean, sure, I know we were a little rough, but… I glared at her again and she gulped as she looked at me. A little. You all dragged me around half the time. I yelled at her again and she took a step away from me before Tsunade grabbed my ear. Naruto. I know we've raised you better than this. I looked back at Tsunade, a frown on his face. I pulled my ear free as I looked at her. I'm treated like a damn dog or something. Tsunade flinched at my yell. I glared at her for a minute before I jumped off again. Tsunade Pav. I sighed as I watched Naruto jump away. I frowned, but I had seen how the girls were treating him. They did treat him like a toy to fight over. Why, Naruto-kun? I looked back at Hinata and she looked crushed as she looked at the way Naruto had left. I sighed as I looked at the poor girl. I sighed as I walked over, got on my knee, and wrapped my arms around her. She grabbed onto my gambler's coat. Why can't Naruto-kun see that we just do all that stuff is because we just want to be close to him? I sighed as I ran my hand down her back as she tried not to cry. Honey, I know, but you all have been smothering him like his voice didn't matter. You can't be angry when he finally snapped back at all of us. But, he's my first friend, I don't want him to pull away from me. I felt for the poor girl as she tried not to sob into my shoulder. Naruto, I hope you calm down soon. You'll break all their hearts if things stay like this. Academy 3rd year Pav. Naruto sat leaning back in his chair, Hinata and Ino beside him. But after the verbal thrashing he lashed out at them with last year, they all backed off. Hinata looked at him out of the corner of her eye and frowned as she looked at his shoulder. Before, she would lay her head on it for the whole day if he'd let her. But now, 2 legendary swords rested on his shoulder with a small black tiger cub in his lap. She thought back to the day Shanks gave Naruto those swords and his family's contract. 6 months ago, Naruto's house. Naruto was sparring against Hinata and Yui. Since his snap at them, his training with them had become much rougher. Before, they'd walk away with just a glancing blow from his wooden swords. Now, they would walk away with a dozen or so bruises that had to be treated by Tsunade. Naruto was still kind to them but wouldn't tell them what was on his mind anymore. He'd grown to a little cold to everyone. His grandfather had tried to break him out of it, but the backlash had also made him back off. Naruto had made it clear he wanted to be left alone. But, Shanks was a kami damn Uzumaki. Leaving family outer alone was not a damn option. As Naruto spared, Shanks walked onto the field with Tsunade at his side, a large summoning scroll in Shanks' good arm. Naruto, you 3 stop for a little while, I got something for you. They all stopped Yui, thankful as she looked at the wooden sword about to strike her stomach again. Hinata sighed as she backed away from her crush and looked longingly at his back. He discarded his orange cloak in favor of a simple white button-up shirt that he left open until the 5th button showed off his chest and the very top of his forming abs. He turned and you could see his longer spiky blonde hair on his shoulder and slightly going down his back. Naruto sent his wooden swords back into his wrist seals. They walked through the groups of clones training and off the water, and Shanks smiled as he looked at Naruto, hoping this would bring his smile back. Naruto, I've decided to replace your swords and to give you mine and your mother's summoning contract. Hinata and Yui look at Naruto, hoping to see his smile again. They felt their hearts lightly a little as a small smile formed on his face. Shanks and Tsunade smiled seeing that smile. Shanks kneeled down, set them down on the ground, and then unrolled the scroll. All of them looked down and saw only 4 names on the scroll. The first name was Ryuma Uzumaki and the second was Roger Uzumaki. After Roger was Shanks Uzumaki and he was red and not black. Naruto looked at the last black one and he tried his best to hold his tears. Kushina Uzumaki in black. Naruto rubbed his eyes before he looked at his grandfather. How do I sign this? Cut your thumb and sign your name, then cover each of your fingers in blood, then press it to the paper under your name. Naruto nodded before pulling out a kunai, cutting his thumb, and getting on his knees. I wrote my name down quickly and did as his gramps told him. He ran his thumb over his fingers and then pressed his hand to the paper. Naruto stood back up and then looked at his grandfather. He smiled before he bit his thumb, then a seal formed on the top of his hand. They all watched as Shanks kneeled down. Shanks threw his hand down to the ground, and as it hit the ground, Shanks yelled out. Uchiha's no summoning jutsu. An enormous white cloud of smoke. A few seconds passed before a roar rang out, followed by a shockwave slammed into the young teens. Naruto grabbed onto Hinata and Yui. Naruto managed to stick to the ground with his chakra. Hinata and Yui clung to Naruto, glad he could react fast enough. Once the last of the blast passed them, Hinata and Yui got back onto their feet. They all looked up at a 20 stories tall black tiger. Yui almost fainted, and Hinata hid behind Naruto as the tiger looked down at them. The orange eye locked on them. The tiger raised an eyebrow as it saw Naruto's lock with the mighty summons. Shanks, you have someone with the same look in his eyes Roger and Ryuma did as a young Uzumaki shinobi and a Uzumaki samurai. So, he is the one you're choosing to leave Ryuma's and Odin's legacies in. I can't say I'm not happy, I can sense the willpower coming off him in waves. The feminine took the three-teen by surprise as they looked up at her. Shanks laughed as Tsunade looked down at the legendary boss summon not seen for 50 years. The tigers seemed to be about to speak again, for all the leaf ninjas appeared ready for battle. In the front stood all the clan heads with the Nujimnins Asuma, Kurenai, Might Guy, and the two Anbu captains Dog and Cat. Behind them stood the Anbu crops with the Hokage and Jiraiya at the very head of the forces. So the leaf Shanks. To think you'd come here of all places. Oh, well. Where you chose to raise a cub is your own choice, I guess. Shanks laughed again before he sat down on the tigress's head. Yeah, but Lady Amya. I need the swords I gave you for safekeeping. Lady Amya laughed a little before she raised her front paw, making all the ninjas ready themselves. But they stopped as she sat down before slamming her paw down. 3 more puffs of smoke came from the front of her paws. As the smoke, 2 normal-sized golden armored white tigers stood there with a sword on their backs. In front of her paw was a small pup-sized black tiger cub. Vespera, my sweet little cub, you need to wake up. The cub grunted in a young feminine whine before she stood up and stretched around. She shook her body before she sat down and looked at Lady Amya. Howie. Vespera jumped at the sudden yell before Yui tackled the small cub, with Hinata jumping into the smile pile. Yui pulled Vespera into her chest and Hinata ran her fingers through her back fur. Vespera started to kick her legs as she struggled in Yui's arms. Help. Mother, they're messing up my fur. Lady Amya started to raise her paw to sweep at the two before Naruto walked over. Yui and Hinata looked at him before he held a hand out. Yui and Hinata gave him the dreaded puppy dog eyes. Naruto held his ground and glared at the two for a second before they gave in, and Yui held Vespera out to him. Naruto took Vespera and put his arms under Vespera. She leaned into his chest and felt the dominant energy coming off him. She purred as she rubbed her head into his chest. Lady Amya blinked as the ninja around them all relaxed as they watched the show before them. Shanks watched with a smirk on his face, and Tsunade laughed a little as she sat on Shanks' lap. My, Lady Amya, I guess your heir has taken a liking to my grandson. Lady Amya hummed as she watched Vespera climb up onto Naruto's shoulder. Vespera rubbed her cheek on Naruto's whisker cheek. She also laughed a little as she saw the looks at the cubs she felt like would try to become the mate with her new summoner. Okay. Everyone, we're here to meet our new summons and hand his swords to him. Vespera sat down on Naruto's shoulder with her body pressed against Naruto's head. The two armored tigers walked over and Lady Amya spoke as they sat down, their back facing Naruto. He looked at the two swords. On the right is Shusui. It has a black blade with a reddish-purple reverse wave, Heiman. It had a Kanemoto-like style, and its tsuba has a flower-like edges in the shape of an octofoil. It also has no accessories on the hilt, just wrapped with black silk. Kashira, tsuba, and kajiri end cap are golden, and the sheath is black, decorated with dark red circles, split into even thirds. Naruto grabbed Shusui and set it on his side before he drew the blade, and many of the Anbu got close to see the blade as well. They all thought the blade was beautiful, and a few wondered if they could find one like it. Naruto resheathed the Shusui and then grabbed Enma. Naruto stopped as he felt the sword pulse in his hand. He blinked, then put on Enma on top of Shusui. Black blade Enma has a black blade too, and was a moderately curved Shobuzukuri-style katana. The tsuba is trefoil shaped, and each lobe is holed in the middle and thickly ridged. The tsuka is lacquered solid lilac. But, at one time before behind blacked it forcefully pulled haki from the former users. Now, it will still forcibly take a large amount each time you use it, but the benefit is the power of your own haki will grow out of need to match the pull. Your bloodline will strengthen several-fold. Now we must return home. I'm sure your grandfather and the former Haki King will explain the rest. All the tigers but Vespera disappeared. Shanks looked at her as she rubbed her head on Naruto's cheek. Vespera, your mother said to leave. Vespera hissed at Shanks, surprising him a little before she spoke. I've the princess of the tigers. I come and go between the summon and human world as I choice. No, explain before I finish clawing out that eye. Shanks sighed and nodded his head, knowing a tiger never made an empty threat. Both are a masterpiece of the legendary swordsmith Shimotsuki Kazaburo and one of the 21 great grade swords. Enma and Shusui are among the best swords in the world. Kazuki Sukiyaki has described Enma as able to cut through to the bottom of hell. Paralleling Aim no Habakiri, its sister sword being able to slice heaven itself. Kazaburo himself deemed Enma to be his best masterpiece in comparison. The ninja around them looking Naruto in amazement. Two of the most valuable swords in all of the elemental nations were just handed over to a teen. Academy 3rd Pav. Vespera got up and stretched out as Ino and Yui left the room, with Vespera jumping onto the desk. Naruto moved his swords to the other side and grabbed Hinata's arm as she stood up. She upped before Naruto pulled her hard, pulled her into his lap and wrapped his arm around her waist. Hinata blushed as she felt the muscles under Naruto's open shirt. But, not caring, she leaned back into Naruto's chest, overjoyed at the contact she'd been longing for. Naruto wrapped his other arm around her waist too. Hinata threw her arms back and interlocked her behind Naruto's neck. Naruto rested his head on Hinata's shoulder and she could see a smile on his face. Hinata's smile crept back onto her face as joy filled her heart once again. Naruto-kun, what's going on with you? Naruto laughed as he rubbed her stomach. His smile dropped as he spoke. I was just sick of being smothered by the four of you. I thought if I made you four back off some you'd learn to just give me some breathing room. But, the last few months I've seen you and the others seem depressed. Especially you and Anko. Hinata unlocked her fingers and started to move around. Naruto let her waist and Hinata turned and got on her knees and looked down at Naruto. Naruto blushed a little as he looked up at Hinata. Hinata blushed before she looked out the window, seeing nobody outside, then looked back at the door to see it was still closed. She smiled before she moved Vespera over a little. Vespera gave her a little growl, but she moved, knowing her friend was finally looking at the girl as a possible mate. Hinata sat down on the desk and grabbed Naruto's shirt and pulled him onto his feet. Hinata. Hinata wrapped her legs around Naruto's waist, locking them in place as she opened to the top of her now slightly tied orange jacket. Naruto blushed as he saw wraps around Hinata's chest. Hinata laughed as she wrapped her arms around his neck again. Yeah, I've been hiding my real breast size. I just wanted to keep wearing this jacket hoping you'd come back around again. Naruto laughed a little before he smiled a little more and put his hands on Hinata's sides. He ran his hands up her side and wrapped his arm around her back. He smiled as he felt her soft long hair. He moved one hand around and ran his fingers through her hair. Hinata was in heaven at this moment. Her Naruto was holding her and she was getting the private time she'd missed so much. Hinata looked into Naruto's eyes and saw a soft look in those eyes that had become so cold. Hinata moved her hands and placed them on Naruto's cheeks and ran her thumbs over his whisker marks. Naruto shivered and Hinata smiled as she may have just found one of his sensitive spots. Hinata please stop. Hinata smiled as she felt his shiver as she played with his whisker marks. No Naruto-kun. You've been very cold to me over the last 6 months. Now, I'm taking the attention I've been wanting and you're going to be a good little fox and let me. Hinata moved one hand from his face and started to run it down his neck before the door slammed open. Naruto pulled Hinata into his chest as they both looked at the door. Hinata saw red when she looked at Kiba and Sasuke. I'm going to kill you too. You just interrupted my first private time in 6 months with my Naruto-kun. Hinata roared before she shoved Naruto back and grabbed Shusui's handle. Naruto held her for a second, trying to zip her jacket back up and managed it before Hinata broke free and drew Shusui as she charged the two fools who'd interrupted them. Ah. I'm an Uchiha, you can't do this. Kiba's dog Akamaru barked before he jumped off Kiba's head, making a run for it. The two quickly followed as she screamed and cursed at them. Naruto sighed as he sat back down and tried to ignore the semi-hard-on in his pants. Naruto frowned at the fact they were all only 13 and she had all but fucking him in the classroom. Then it hit Naruto that Hinata merrily killed the two of them. Naruto quickly put Shusui's sheath on his side with Emna on the top again. Naruto grabbed Vespera as he started to run out of the classroom to try and save the fools. 10 minutes later, 3rd Pav. The clan heads laughed as they walked out of the Akamichi barbecue restaurant with Shanks, Tsunade, and Shizune in the back. Shanks looked at them with a raised eyebrow as he looked at them. Tsunade, Shizune, do you two really think its things are possible? Tsunade smiled and nodded, wrapping her arm around Shanks' good arm. Yes, I have cells from my grandfather that were taken from one of Orochimaru's labs. I could construct a prosthetic limb with mobility and sensation as well. But I don't know how well your haki would work with it. Shanks nodded before Tsunade smirked and pulled his arm into her breast more. Besides, I have some of my eggs frozen. Who knows, some more Uzumaki and Senju kids running around could be nice. Shanks nodded before he leaned down a little and gave Tsunade a small kiss before they all heard screaming. Everyone stopped and looked around before Akamaru ran past them with Kiba and Sasu close behind. They watched the two panicking teens running. Behind them was the rage-filled eyes of Hinata as she swung Shusui at them as she chased them. Chasing behind her was Naruto, with the sparrow clinging to his back as he yelled for Hinata to stop. Tsume and Makoto looked on in shock as they watched their kids running away. Hiashi watched in shock as Hinata screamed at them for running her moment with her Naruto-kun. Shanks burst out laughing as Naruto offered Hinata anything and everything if she stopped trying to kill the two idiots. Shizune logged before she spoke up. With what we just saw, I think maybe they walk in on the two before they could have some fun. The Ashi's and Shanks' faces turned white before they took off after the group. Tsunade laughed a little as she watched them running after them. Chapter 7. Author's warning: lemon. In this chapter, there will be the first of many lemons. The first will be between Naruto with Anko. Kyuubi speaking. 1 month later. Naruto Pav. I smiled as I laid back on the grass in front of our training pond. The sparrow was asleep on my left side. Ah. Mercy. I sighed as I heard Hinata go off on Yui and Anko again. I sighed before I leaned up and looked around. Hinata had Anko skipping across the water and Yui struggled to block Hinata's kicks and palm thrusts. I looked over and saw Ino training with Tsunade. Ah. I turned and sighed as I saw Hinata send Anko flying away. She bounced across the water heading for me. I got up from my spot on the ground then jumped onto the and caught her mid-bounce. I laughed as she pushed her headband back up. I smiled down at her and she blushed as she looked at me. I laughed a little before I jumped back, dodging a wave sent by Hinata and Yui clash. I landed in a tree before I jumped back down to the ground. I set her back down and she placed a hand on my chest to steady herself as she got her footing back. Her hand lingered on my chest before we heard Gramps yell out. "Everyone, we need to talk." Anko moved her hand and started to run over. I laughed a little before I walked over and grabbed Enma and Shusui. I put them on my side before turning and starting to walk over and noticing Hiashi. "What?" Hinata yelled and I cringed at her yell. I ran over as Hinata started yelling at Hiashi. "No." Hiashi hardened his face as I got up behind her. "Hinata. I have let you train with Lord Shanks and Naruto for almost a decade. It's time you learn the final techniques of the Hyuga. You need to learn 8 divination 64 palms and the 28 palms. With your skill, you could even master the trigrams of the 256 palms. Then you have to learn the 8 trigrams. Palm rotation." I stood beside Hinata as she glared at her Hiashi. Hiashi took a step back as if she'd struck him. I wrapped around her waist and she relaxed into my side but kept her glare at her father. Hiashi hardened his face again as he stood straight and looked at us. "And that is another thing we need to talk about. Hinata, you've monopolized Naruto's attention for years. Others have come here to train with him and you've taken all that time when you're all here. Did you learn nothing from the 6 months of depression when you all smothered him too much?" I felt Hinata stiffen in my arm before she finally broke eye contact with her father. She looked down at the ground and I glared at him. I leaked some of my conqueror's haki and kai, focusing it all on him and I watched him turn white before Gramps spoke up. "Enough, Naruto." I blinked and huffed before I cut off both. Hiashi sighed before Anko spoke up. I hate to say this, but he's right. We would like to train with Naruto a little more." Hinata tried to grab at Anko, but I tightened my hold on her. She thrashed in the hold for a second before an idea to stop this. I smirked before sending a weak electro pulse onto her stomach. She stopped dead, then shivered and let out a little groan before I let her go. "What was that and why does my chakra feel funny?" I laughed a little and rubbed the back of my head. "Well, with the chakra control I've learned, thanks to Gramps and Tsunade, I've picked up on some medical and read about electrostimulation. I've been training to use it to stun opponents in a fight. But, I guess I still need more control so I don't affect the chakra network. I just meant to make your body relax so you won't be using chakra or the styles we've taught you." She frowned, but I smiled now I had my chance. "Besides, I'd like to make a bet with you." I got her attention and she nodded. "Okay." I smiled before I crossed my arms as I looked at her. "If you can master all the techniques your father talked about before graduation, I'll any 2 things you want. But if you can't, you have to do any 2 things I want." She smiled wide before she looked back at Hiashi. "When do we start?" Hisashi sighed before nodding to me. Hiashi walked off the porch and put a hand on her shoulder before he sunshined them away. I sighed and dropped to the ground, Yui and Ino behind me. "Ami, that girl has a presence." I nodded as I looked over at Yui. "No kidding, image having her after you 24/7. She shivered and nodded before Gramps spoke up again. "Okay, well, you 4 are free to do and plan as you please for the next year and a half. Tsunade and I are off to see the Hokage and then the hospital to see how the work of a private project of hers." I blinked before it hit me. "Oh. Do you mean that project she and Shizune have been working on non-stop for the last month? Gramps nodded before Tsunade let go of his arm and then looked at the girls. You three follow me for a few minutes. They all flinched as they looked at her. We all knew what Swan would do if they didn't listen to her. I sighed before Gramps stepped off the porch. He sat down beside me with a smile on his face. He laughed before I pulled out a scroll and held it for me to take. I took it and set it down on the ground, knowing Gramps wanted to talk. The Ashi and Hinoka will have the same talk with Hinata when she's calm enough. Tsunade, me, and Shizune will be out of the house a lot over the next few weeks. And I've sent it up so when the last month before graduation comes you all will not see each other. There is going to be a large tournament for all the new ninjas in the village. That month will be used to study for the finals. Now, as for the scroll. There is a contraceptive seal for a woman on that scroll. Enko is 18 and the rest of you are about to be 15. We all know what may happen, and with Hinata I'm sure you know what could happen when she learns you're alone at night. I nodded and looked at the scroll. So, are you say we can? Gramps gave me a stern look and I nodded as I picked the scroll up. I put it into my shirt as I stood up and heard footsteps. I looked over and saw all the girls had blushes on their faces. But Anko looked straight at me and was biting her lower lip. Tsunade looked down at me and pulled a box out of her sleeve. I don't want great godchildren around just yet. She threw a wrapped box into my chest and I caught it. I looked at her for a second, then nodded before I slipped it into my shirt with the scroll. Okay, well all that aside I guess we can break all this year and a half for some one-on-one training. So who wanted me to themselves for the rest of the year? He's mine. Anko yelled and threw Naga at me again. Not again. Naga quickly wrapped her now 10-foot body around my body. The sudden weight threw me off and I fell to the ground. She wrapped her body tight around my forearms as she flicked her tongue on my cheek a few times before Anko jumped off the side of the porch and grabbed my shirt. As she dragged me, I saw Vespera still asleep. Vespera. I saw her head shoot up and she looked over at me as Anko dragged me towards the gate. Anko. Let my clan's newest summoner go. Shut up you furball. Vespera started to run after us and she was faster than Anko. Vespera caught up to us and jumped onto my chest and hissed at Naga as she snapped at her. Let him go. Vespera jumped over Naga to try to bite her. She landed on Anko's back and dug her claws into her overcoat. He pulled herself up and bit down on her neck and she screamed as she tried to pull her off. I smiled and used the body replacement jutsu. I stood up as Naga hissed at the sudden cold metal box. Naruto. Get her off of me. Vespera come here. Vespera let her neck go and jumped off her. I jumped forward and caught her before she could hit the ground. I looked back at Anko as she rubbed the back of her neck. I blinked as I looked at her neck and saw 3 tomos right at the bottom to the right of her neck. I put Vespera on my shoulder, walked up behind her, grabbed her coat and pulled it off the top right side of her overcoat. I looked at it before a second and wrapped an arm around Anko's stomach and forearm, keeping her in place as she yelled for me to let her go. When I let go, she turned and looked at me and I locked eyes with her. Naruto, please, I know I didn't tell you, but I didn't want you to abandon me like a lot of others have. I know that I should. I crossed my arms as I looked at her. She stopped when I put a hand up and looked ready to run. You know my Gramps is a seal master and has been teaching about seals, right? I'm a level 7 seal master and removing a curse mark is something we could do, right? Anko blinked as she looked at me and I laughed a little before I walked over and fixed her coat. I blinked before I tapped her shoulder a few times before she grabbed my shirt and slammed me against the wall. Vespera hissed as she was thrown from my shoulder, Anko pressed her body into mine and I blushed as her breast pressed against my chest. I quickly realized she wasn't wearing a bra. You mean to tell me you two could get it off? I laughed before I put my hands up. Well, we'd need to look at the inner working of the cruise mark and see how many levels of the seals we're dealing with. We need to have an idea of what we're dealing with. Does it increase your physical abilities? What about increased stamina? Body alterations or any other number of things? Anko smiled as she looked at me, then her smile got darker. Naruto, you're 10 days away from 15, right? I laughed and nodded as I looked at her. Yeah, but why don't we go get some dango and just calm down? Her smile widened as she got closer to my face. We'll get some later, you may get to put that contraceptive seal on me. I heard from Lady Tsunade that the Uzumaki clan were known as stamina monsters in both chakra and physical stamina. I flinched as she raised a hand and I readied for the shunshin. A second later, we were in a nice looking living room. Anko let me go and I fell back in a chair shusui and Enma's handle slapped against my stomach when I landed. Haga slid off my body and off the chair. I groaned as I leaned back up before I felt Anko pull them off my stomach and off my side. Hey. Be quiet little foxy cun. I blushed as she threw them onto the couch next to the chair. She moved her arms and shoulders back and her overcoat fell off her, leaving her in a new see-through set of chainmail and her burnt orange skirt. She kicked her sandals and then unstrapped her shin guards. She smiled down at me with a blush on her face as she pulled on the strap on her skirt. It dropped to the ground and I looked at a pair of dark purple panties with lace on the sides. Damn Anko. Oh, wait until we start the real fun. She grabbed my shirt and then pulled me out of the chair. Anko, I don't think this is the smartest thing to do. You just became a Takebetsujinin, so maybe we should be training. She smiled before she pulled me closer and pressed her lips to mine. I blushed before I wrapped my arms around her waist. Anko opened her mouth and bit down on my lower lips. I opened my mouth and she med before she pressed more into me and wrapped her right leg around mine. Her tongue met mine. It felt strange at first, but I liked it. I ran my hands lower and stopped on her hips. I pressed my hands down on them and felt just a little give. I used my electro-pulse and Anko shivered. She moaned and broke our kiss. She looked at me with a glazed-over look in her eyes. See, can you try that out on my tits? My face felt like it was on fire when I looked down at her breast. I nodded my head before an evil idea ran through my mind. I slowly ran my hand up her body, sending small electro-pulses into her body as I moved my hand. She shivered as my hand traveled over her body. When I reached her breast, Anko was drooling and I felt something wet on my leg. I looked down and saw her panties had a fast-growing wet spot. I knew what that meant and I smiled as an even more evil idea came to mind. I cupped Anko's left breast for a few seconds before I let her go as her eyes started to come out of her haze. I charged a little bit more of a powerful electric charge. I threw my hand down, slipped my hand into her panties, and forced her into another kiss as she screamed and I felt my hand get covered in her fluids. Ah. She went limp into my chest, breaking our kiss as she breathed into my chest. I smiled and pulled my hand out of her panties and was about to wipe my hand off on my pants. Anko grabbed my wrist. She slipped it back into her panties and covered the top of my hand with hers. I blushed as I felt all the heat on my hand. She rested her chin on my chest as she rested on my chest. This is yours and my body are yours, Naruto-kun. Whenever and wherever you want. I blushed, fully understanding what she meant. Anko, I can't treat you like that. And what if Hinata, Yui and Ino find out about this? She smiled before shoving me back and we fell into the chair. She pulled the lever and I flew back, not realizing this was a recliner. Anko laughed as she laid on my chest. Anko let my hand go and I pulled my hand out as she spoke. I don't mind sharing, and seeing as you and Gramps are the last two with a bloodline you could be put in the craw. The minimum number of girls you'd have to pick is 5, so counting me, Yui, Hinata and Ino, you just need to find one more so the elder can't force someone onto you. I nodded, then sighed. Well, we just have to get them on board with the idea. But, you know, Hinata may lose her cool. Anko laughed as she laid there. If you do what you just did to me to her, then I think she'll be fine with it. I laughed as I wrapped my arms around her lower back. Whatever you saw, Anko Heim. She laughed as she slammed my chest. After I get the feeling in my legs back, we'll go and get some dango and head off to my private training area. Okay, and you know, if everything goes well, that the finals at the end of the academy next year I'll be on a team with either Yui or Hinata, seeing as they both are in the lead for Kunoichi of the Year. Much like you got when you graduated as Kunoichi of the Year. Haha, I loved the look on those little bitches' faces when they cried out at the teachers. She sat on my lap and started waving her hands around a little. No, the snake whore is the Kunoichi of the Year. Or kill the cheating snake bitch. I still can't get over the hell you unleashed that day. The looks we got as I dragged you off to get dango with my first C-rank pay. My blood boiled at remembering that day. A year and a half ago, Naruto's POV. Naruto smiled as he watched Anko own another Kunoichi. Winner Anko Mitarashi. I smiled as Anko threw her fist into the air. You can't allow this. I looked to the left and saw a girl from a citizen clan cried out. She was a girl Anko had rolled over in the opening round. I watched as others started crying out for them to disqualify her for cheating somehow. She's the snake's whore. She must have cheated. Kill that damn snake bitch already. Anko looked down and I saw tears starting to fill the edge of her eyes. A group of new genin boys jumps down into the arena. I narrowed my eyes before I stood holding my swords. Naruto, wait. I jumped down, ignoring Tsunade, and landed between Anko and the fools surrounding her. Move, Brett. I looked up at the Chunin who was talking to me. He was a Chunin I didn't recognize and I hummed as I drew Shusui and rested it on my shoulder as many in the stand started to yell. Kill them both. Kill the snake whore and the demon. But the demon. I smiled before I felt Gramps' hockey blast across the stands. Everyone yelling was down and I smiled as I looked at the now scared genin and the Chunin. I tapped Shusui on my shoulder a few times as I looked at the Chunin. So, who wants to be cutter beaten first? The new genin charged me, and I laughed as I turned and swung Shusui to the side infused with wind chakra. I sent a blast of weak air blade at them. The genins couldn't dodge as the blade, but the Chunin managed to jump away before the genins got hit with the attack. They all flew back and slammed into the walls and slid down. My attack had cut up their clothes, and a few had shallow cuts on their chest or their arms when they tried to protect themselves. Damn you. I jumped up as the Chunin tried to grab my feet. Anko jump. Right. I smirked, sheathing Shusui as I threw my right leg above my head. Crimson style. Battle axe water breaker. I coated my leg with haki and smiled as I charged water charka around my leg. I slammed back into the ground and onto the arena floor and onto the walls. A second water-like shockwave follows, shattering the floor. The genin slammed back into the wall again, and I smiled as I looked down at the arm sticking out of the ground. I could still sense that his life force was still strong. I leaned down, grabbed his arm, and pulled him out of the ground. It looked like my attack had done so real damage but not life-threatening. He had blood coming from his mouth and head. I shook him a little, and he groaned and opened his left eye. I pulled him closer and spoke low. Next time I'll finish this, so don't let this happen again. I dropped him and turned to look at a stunted Anko. Damn Naruto. I smiled before I looked up at the judge's box. I saw the ninja judges flinch as I looked at them. Come down here with her ward before I come and take it. One of them quickly grabbed something and then jumped down. She was a younger woman with brown hair and green eyes. She was dressed in a standard outfit for a Chunin. Here you go, Anko. I smiled as she held the certificate and a C-rank pay scroll. I smiled before Anko looked between her and me. I blinked and knew what was coming when I saw that smile. Crap. I turned and tried to run, but Naga quickly wrapped herself in my chest again. She flicked her tongue on my cheek a few times, and I sighed as I heard Gramps busting a gut as he laughed. I also heard Hinata yelling for Yui and Ino to let her go. I sighed as Anko grabbed my shirt and started to drag me again. Did the dango stand? I looked up at the stands and frowned as I saw him and Tsunade still laughing while Hinata was being held back with ninja wire by Yui. I looked at the other people and cracked a smile as I looked at the shock and awe on their faces. Naruto current POV. I frowned, but Anko leaned down and cupped my checks. Hey now. I know that look, you need to calm down, Naruto. You won, they lost, it's over. I sighed and I rested my hands on her thighs. You're too nice to me. She smirked before she moved around and laid down on my chest. Her breast pressed into my chest and she crossed her arms under her chin. I smiled, then wrapped my arms around her back and she smiled as she looked at me. You know, I won't mind if you stayed the night, or maybe I could come stay with you. I smiled before kissing her again and she hummed before she moved again. She broke the kiss and sat up on my lap again. Okay, this is happening, so get in that bedroom and strip. She jumped off me and shook her butt as she looked back at me. She quickly rushed to a door and opened it. I blinked and smiled before I got out of the chair and pulled the scroll and box out of my shirt. I threw them onto the couch and pulled my shirt off. I kicked my sandals off and stayed in my pants and grabbed the scroll. I rushed into the door and blushed as I looked at the nude Anko with her hair down. Anko had sat herself up at the head of the bed and smiled as she pulled on the soaked panties as she looked at me. Oh? So you finally have abs and that chest and your shoulders. I looked at her and saw she had a flat stomach with the beginnings of abs on her. I smiled and walked over and unrolled the scroll in my hand. There were a dozen seals and I saw the construction was perfect. I laughed as it would active as soon as it was placed on a female chakra system. I covered my hand in chakra and placed it over one of the seals. I flinched as I felt the sting from the ink moving to my hand. You okay, Naruto-kun? I laughed before I felt Uraya run like a bat out of hell. I smirked before I grabbed Anko's thighs and sat up. I stood up and Anko wrapped her arms around my neck and wrapped her legs around my waist. She smiled and leaned back and looked at me with a smirk on her face. So? Round 2. I laughed before I patted her thigh. Get changed and we'll get some dango and go pervert hunting. I got a feel for the pervert's location. Anko smiled as she looked at me. I love you, Foxy-kun. I laughed before I ran my hand up her side as she got onto her feet. I cupped her cheek when I touched her face and pulled her into another soft kiss. She leaned into the kiss and she started to bite down on my lower lip again. I pulled back and rubbed my thumb on her cheek. Now Anko, we've played enough for now. Plus, you still owe me the reward you never gave me for holding out against Hiashi. Oh? I think maybe I could help with that before too long. I smiled before I ran a finger from her cheek to her lips and down to her chin. I can think of a few things you could do, but not until we have the others on board with the craw. But I'm still more than happy to give you some fun to keep you calm and happy, my snake goddess. I laughed a little as she turned red. I smiled before I ran my hand along her jaw, then ran it down her neck and stopped as I reached her side. She grabbed my free hand, then moved it back up and pressed my hand to the center of her chest. I could feel her heart through her chest and smiled as she pressed down on my hand. It's yours, you're the only man I'll ever let see me like this. You're the only one I'll ever let touch me like this. I smiled, moved my other hand from her cheek, pulled her headband down, let it fall to her neck, and then pressed our foreheads together. Thank you, my snake goddess. She laughed and pressed her body to mine. I laughed and felt like she was like Naga wanting to cling to me. Okay, really Anko, get dressed and let's go get some dango. No. I don't want to let go of my cute little foxy cun. I smirked before I let her side go, then used my water chakra and pulled water out of the air. When I had a little in I smiled before I chilled it with my wind chakra. I raised my hand, then turned my hand and let it fall onto her ass. Ah. Anko screamed and jumped away from me and grabbed the back of her butt. Her face was bright red and I laughed a little before I grabbed my pants and boxers. Get dress. I'll be waiting outside. I quickly moved as she started to yell. Damn it, Naruto. Shanks pav. I sighed as I watched Anko dragging my grandson off. The sparrow would most likely going to be held in a snake stranglehold by one of Anko's snakes. Shouldn't you two try to stop her? I looked over at the still flustered Yui and Ino. Do either of you feel like trying to stop her? I don't feel like being attacked by snakes. Besides, we all saw that look in her eyes. She's not going to hurt Naruto, well, maybe make him limp for a day or so, but he'll be fine. Tsunade laughed and I smirked at the blush on their faces. I sighed before I stood up and looked at everyone. Okay girls, you two need to go home for now. Shizune, if you wouldn't mind, could you stay and watch the house with Maya and Ima? Shizune smiled and gave me a small bow before she walked over and held a scroll. This scroll was delivered to the gate earlier this morning. I smiled as I took the scroll. Thank you, Shizune. I pulled out one of the many scrolls I had on me. This scroll had 60,000 ryo sealed inside. I keep on me. Here, Shizune. This scroll has 60,000 ryo in it. Why don't you order out? We'll be gone for a long time, so why don't you order some gourmet food for all of you? She smiled and bowed before taking the scroll and rushing back inside. You know she and I are grateful for this life, Shanks. I smiled and nodded before I turned and took Tsunade's hand. Come on, I'm sure the old man is freaking out about why we set up a meeting with him the formal way. Tsunade hummed as we started to walk. I still don't understand why you're going to talk to him about this. Why build Naruto a house? This one is more than big enough. I smiled before I looked down at her. Well, if we are going to try and have our own little one, I think it's best if Naruto has his own space. Plus, I've seen how Shizune looks at him. She's only 8 years older than him. You never know what could happen if we have her stay in his house. Haha, Shanks, please don't torture my student like that. Ah. I blinked knowing that yell and hiss. I looked up a wall and saw Vespera hissing down at a few larger cats. Vespera. She looked over at me and frowned before she ran over the wall and then jumped onto my shoulder. Where is Naruto? She hissed before she spoke again. That snake woman took him. She said something about a seal and getting to use it. I froze and groaned before Tsunade squeezed my hand. Looks like you were right. Anko or Hinata were the two you were scared would jump him. Looks like Anko was the one. So I won my bet with Mayu and Ima, so I'm scared something is going to happen now. I knew what she meant and I was a little scared about that too. Chapter 8. Note: guy in the anime, Shanks is 27 when he met Luffy, so he's only around 40 at the Marine Fort. So he's actually older than he should be in this story. So, don't worry about the math too much. As for Yuta, I have not planned to use her in this story. A year and a half training chapter. Third person POV. 1 month. Naruto groaned before his eyes opened and looked up at his ceiling. He blinked a few times before he noticed the weight on his chest. And he felt something warm pressed into his side. Naruto looked down and smiled, seeing Anko asleep on his chest. Anko was naked as the day she was born. Naruto looked down to his side and saw Naga and Vespera lying next to him. He smiled before he sighed and knew they had to get up. Anko needed to work on her control before heading off to the tea building, and he had to get to class. Naruto patted Anko's shoulder and she groaned before moving around on his chest. Let me sleep, Naruto. Naruto laughed before he lifted his hand on her back. Okay then, water it is. Naruto let the water fall on her back and she yelped, making Naga and Vespera jump up. Anko shot up and had her chest covered. What the hell, Naruto? Naruto slipped out of the bed and was in front of his standing closet. His sleep pants were black with gray stripes going down his legs. Naruto put on a black tank top before dodging a kunai thrown by Anko. Stay still. I'll be on the pond, Anko. Naruto jumped out his open window and Vespera jumped onto Naruto's back, claws hanging on. Naruto landed on the roof and then jumped again. He flipped in the air and landed on the water. Naruto laughed as he heard Anko going crazy. Vespera yawned as she rubbed her face on my cheek. Naruto, why has she been clinging to you the last few days? Naruto sighed before he reached up and rubbed Vespera's head. Well, you see, she and I have come real close. I think you know what I mean given how strong your sense of smell is. Vespera smirked as she swayed her tail. Yeah, and you're right, Naruto. I can smell her all over you. You know that when Hinata finds out about that happened, you're dead. Naruto gulped before he jumped to the side, dodging Anko's drop kick. Anko had dressed in a pair of tight shorts and a tight purple tank top. Naruto slid across the surface of the water, dodging kunai and shuriken. Vespera clung to Naruto's shirt as he moved around. Naruto, make your tigress stop. I hummed as I jumped off the water and landed on a tree branch. Naruto watched Anko look around, trying to find him. He smiled before jumping around in the trees until he was behind her. Naruto jumped out onto the water and wrapped his arms around Anko's waist. Anko jumped and huffed as she leaned back into Naruto's chest. Damn it, Naruto. Naruto laughed a little as Vespera pawed at Anko's hair bun. Anko nodded her head before Naruto looked down at Vespera. She stopped pawing at the bun and jumped off Naruto's shoulder and landed in the water. I'm going to find some breakfast, Naruto. Naruto nodded as Vespera ran off. Naruto smiled as Anko rubbed her hand on his forearm. You're so lucky, you're a good fuck, Naruto. Naruto laughed a little more before he felt two people coming. People are coming this way. They broke apart fast and Anko turned, trying to land a kick as Yui and Ino walked through the front gate. Yui and Ino watched as Naruto pushed the punch aside, grabbed her arm, then pulled her forward. Naruto went in for a palm thrust he used to line up to finish a fight. Anko used the substitution jutsu and Naruto looked at the trees and dodged another storm of shuriken. Damn, those two are really going at it. Ino nodded as she watched Naruto jump into the trees. But it's weird to see him without his swords. Yui nodded before they heard Anko screaming before she was thrown out of the trees and rolled across the ground. Though those two have been at each for a while now. Yui and Ino looked down at Vespera as she chewed on a dead rabbit's leg. Ino turned a little green and Yui sighed as she looked back at the fight. Naruto dominated the fight and had complete control of the pace and speed. Yui, do you think we could get in on the combat training? I flinched as Anko landed a punch on Naruto's face. But Naruto countered with a low blow to her side. Anko was forced back and Yui felt slightly angry that now another woman had all of Naruto's attention. Yeah, I got a way to make sure we can. Ino looked at Yui before Yui cracked her knuckles and looked at Ino. We both want time with him too. So, why not just drop in on them? In our world you never know when more enemies will jump in. Ino smiled at Yui's idea and they rushed over to the pond. Ino pulled out two kunai and Yui started to weave hand signs. Horse, tiger, serpent, ram, monkey, boar, horse, tiger. Ino jumped at Naruto's back, forcing him to jump out from between Anko and Ino. Yui got above Naruto as he landed near the pond's edge and looked up. Pain. Nkakik no jutsu, great fireball jutsu. Naruto ran through hand signs and then threw his head back as water filled his mouth. Suiten no jutsu. Water formation wall. The two jutsu collided and steam erupted from the impact. Anko, Ino and Yui were surprised to see Naruto pulling off an air rank defensive jutsu like it was nothing. Yui started to fall and she had her two Tomo Sharingan active and cursed her lack of water affinity. Yui landed and got grabbed from behind by one of Anko's snakes. Anko pulled her back as Naruto came out from the pond, trying to grab Yui. Anko sent her down between herself and Ino. The three looked at Naruto as he pulled himself out of the water. Not a bad idea. Force me out with a pincer attack, then come at me from above. But all that aside, why are you two here? We have to go to the academy today and coming here takes you far from that route. Yui and Ino smiled as they looked at Naruto. Anko frowned as she looked between the two girls. Naruto laughed before I turned and looked at the house. Anko, you and I need to finish our spar, then get changed for work in the academy. Anko sighed before she spoke up. No, these two have ruined our tempo, Naruto. Naruto looked back at Anko, eyebrow raised. Yui and Ino looked at her raised eyebrows. Anko looked between the three. Anko never talks like that, who are you? Naruto laughed a little as Yui spoke. Anko glared at her before she looked back at Naruto. And I don't think you need to get changed. Hell, all you need is your swords and sandals. Naruto nodded before he tensed up as Hinata appeared on the pond, Hanabi at her side. Naruto looked at them. His eyes widened as he looked at them. The two had changed her clothes completely. Hanabi had changed from her bright white kimono and child sandals into a black kimono with red and blue flames at the bottom. She had on knee-high shinobi boots and Naruto could make out her kunai and shuriken holders. Naruto looked at Hinata. Hinata was dressed in a burnt orange top jacket that was open. She wore a dark blue deep-cut v-neck, showing off her full size. She was a little bigger than Anko, making her almost an E-cup. Naruto looked down and saw she had on a skirt that opened on the sides and she'd wrapped her thighs in bandages with holsters on both thighs. Looking lower, Naruto saw clear and flawless skin and she had on heels like Tsunade and Shizune wore. The other girl saw a little blood coming from Naruto's nose. Naruto started to sense the bloodlust and quickly wiped his nose before he looked at Anko. She had a smile on her face and had a kunai in hand before pointing it at her crotch. "I need to get my sword." Naruto jumped away, scared out of his mind, not wanting to get his cut off. Naruto knew Anko didn't mind sharing, but he also knew this was her time, not Hinata's. Naruto landed on the roof and then hopped back into the room. Naruto sighed before I felt someone right behind him. Naruto turned his hand on Enma's handle. Anko was behind him and had her eyes narrowed as she tapped her foot on the floor. "If I remember right, you're mine for another 4 months." Anko took a few steps and Naruto backed up a little. "You're supposed to only look at me right now, and once the craw kicks in you're free to stare all you want at all of us. Oh, and don't worry, I left a shadow clone with the others before I slipped away." Naruto backed up into the closet. Anko stood right in front of Naruto with that smirk on her face. She wrapped her arms around Naruto's neck and Naruto relaxed, seeing that Anko wasn't going to kill him yet. Naruto wrapped his arms around Anko's lower back. Anko ran her hands up Naruto's chest and cupped Naruto's cheek. "You look at her like that again in my 4 months, and I'll make you pay." Naruto laughed before a crash was heard outside. They broke apart and Anko dashed out the door as Naruto jumped back out onto the roof. He looked down and saw the pond closing back up. He sighed as he saw the real Anko come back out in new clothes a minute later. Anko wore a pair of thigh-length tore shorts with black stockings and blue ninja sandals. Anko had on a tightly wrapped purple and black battle kimono. She had her hair pulled back. Naruto saw Hinata with a mad look on her face. Naruto looked around as Yui and Ino climbing out of the water. Naruto jumped down onto the pond, put 2 fingers into his mouth, and then let out a whistle. Everyone looked at him before he clapped his hands. "Okay, everyone, we need to head out. Hinata, Yui, Ino, and Hanabi, you guys head off to the academy. I'm running off to the weapons shop before coming to the academy. Anko, you and I are going the same way since you need to got to work. I can use Soru to get you there on the way." Anko smiled before she walked over and wrapped an arm around his arm before the two vanished in a blur. Hinata and Hanabi used their Byakugan to watch Naruto as he and Anko rushed across the building roofs. Hinata was annoyed at the fact she had to share his attention, but she knew in the end, her father and mother were right. If she pressed too hard, she could lose him again. Hanabi smiled as she watched Naruto and Anko as they got out of range of her Byakugan. She had a pretty good idea of what was going on and she felt her sister would lose it when she figured it out. Naruto's POV. I landed outside of the T building and Anko sighed as she held onto my arms. I looked around and glared at the civilians around us. All of them backed away and I huffed before I nudged Anko with my shoulder. She laughed before she kissed my cheek and let me go. I grabbed her arm and then pulled her into a kiss. She hummed as she wrapped her arms around my neck. After a second, Anko broke the kiss. I sensed the disgust of the villagers, but I didn't give a damn. I love how pissed they all look. I smiled as I rested on her side as felt a shinobi above us. Seems like someone finally found their balls. I gave her one more kiss before I let her go. I'll be back at lunchtime with some dango. Anko smiled before nodding and shunshin away. I grabbed my sword before using Soru and got behind a dog-masked Anbu. He spun and looked at me with 2 black eye holes. He was tall and dressed in the standard uniform of the Anbu Corps. I saw the tattoo on his arm and knew he was a captain. What stood out the most was his grey gravity-defying hair. "I guess I'm getting rusty, seeing that you sensed me out so quickly." I nodded before I pulled my swords off my side and sat down. One of my bloodline abilities lets me sense when someone nearby can help me dodge attacks. And, once I unlock the advanced form, I'll be able to do what the Sharingan is rumored to do. My gramps told me when it's at the highest level he can see 10 seconds into the future. As a fellow ninja, you know as well as I do that every second counts. He was quiet for a minute before he laughed a little. "I like you, kid. You take this life seriously and understand even while not being a ninja yet. What other abilities does your bloodline do?" I didn't sense any ill intent or hate coming from him. "Well, I can harden my body to make any physical attack, weapon, and a few low-level jutsu. The other and most powerful ability is one I don't much care for, but it's very useful. It's called Conqueror's Haki or the Sing's Will, whichever you prefer. If your willpower is weaker than mine, I can force them into unconsciousness. But, I hate to use a power that forces others to submit to me." Again he was quiet before he sat down and crossed his legs as he looked at me. "Hey kid, if you had a choice between finishing a mission or saving your comrades, which would you pick?" I looked at him for a second, then laughed a little. I felt a little worry creep into him. I stood up and put my swords back on my sides. My friends and comrades. To hell with the mission. If I have to sacrifice my reputation and pay to save someone I care about, I'll do it every time. I learned that by studying the White Fang of the Leaf, a true hero of the Leaf Village. He should have lived a long life, not ended it thinking he failed. When I have a team of my own, I refuse to become scum who abandons them. I felt his emotions running wild as I looked at him. But I turned as I felt him fill with gratitude and pride. Wait. I turned back and saw him holding a hand out to me on his feet. Yes. I swear I could feel his smile as he looked at me. I have a friend who would love to meet and train someone like you. Tell me, what is your name and what is your affinity do you have? I looked at the man for a moment, thinking over this man's offer. Naruto Uzumaki, and I have lightning, water, and wind. I have high affinity in all three. I felt the shock coming from him before I grabbed hold of my swords. I'm sure I'll see you again very soon, dog. I used Zoro and landed back down on the ground down the road and smiled as I saw the weapons shop and looked up at the sign. Higurashi's weapon shop. Why does that name sound familiar? I opened the door and looking the show and saw a large, well-muscled man leaning back into a chair with an orange book in hand and had a smile on his face and was giggling as he read. I hummed as I looked around the shop and smiled when I saw the large scrolls I was looking for. As I walked over, I saw the man look up out of the corner of my eye. His eye widened before he set the book down. Hey, you're the Uzumaki heir. I nodded as I grabbed the large scroll and 2 scroll hip holsters and 2 scrolls a quarter the size of the large scroll I had plans for. You must be Shank's grandson. He knows Gramps. I looked at him as I set the holsters and scrolls down on the counter. You know my Gramps. He smiled as he looked at me. Yeah, he's given me a few seals I need in exchange for discounts on scroll and chakra ink. And if you want that massive sealing scroll, you need a shoulder holster to hold it to your back or a belt holster keeping on your lower back. I nodded before I heard a girlish scream. I jumped to the side, making a girl miss a jump at me. I held onto my swords. I looked down at a girl with black hair and gray eyes. She wore her hair in 2 Chinese-style buns on her head, with short bangs framing her face. She wore a pink sleeveless kipao-style blouse with red sleeve trimmings, yellow fastening buttons, and dark green pants. I saw a headband on her head and a scroll patch on her thigh. I backed away a bit as she turned, and I saw her staring straight at my swords. Those are 2 of the 21 greater grade blades. Shusui and Enma. I blinked and laughed a little as I looked at her. Oh, you just wanted to get a look at my swords. Well, if you'd like, I'll let you see them. The man sighed as the girl quickly rushed up, hands clasped as she looked up at me. Yes. I laughed as I waved my hand down at her. I pulled Shusui and Enma out of their sheaths and held them out to her. She quickly took them from my hands and looked up at them with stars in her eyes. I laughed and left her to admire as I pulled out my swirl wallet and pulled out the new debit card Gramps had finally gotten from the bank. He smiled and took it from me and set his book down. He stood up and I hummed as I saw he was just an inch or 2 shorter than Gramps. He was also built like a mountain. I tapped my foot on the ground a few times before the girl started to talk to me. Hey, you're that Naruto kid, right? I turned and she smiled as she held the swords back out to me. I smiled and grabbed the handles. I resheathed them and smiled as I looked at her. Yeah, I'm Naruto Uzumaki, and you with those pretty little eyes. She blushed and smiled before she looked away from me. Tenten Higurashi. I smiled and grabbed one of her hands that we were playing with the bottom of her blouse. I pulled her hand up to my face and pushed my hair up and gave her hand a quick kiss. She turned red as I looked at her. Uzumaki. I leaned back and a kunai flew past where my head was a second ago. I smiled as I leaned forward and looked at the raging man. What? Can't I show a beautiful flowersome affection? Tenten ep before running behind the counter, red as it could be. And hid behind the angry man. I quickly dodged another kunai and sword before he threw a sealed scroll and the debit card at me. I ran around for a minute, watching him lose his mind. I snagged his book without him seeing it, then sealed it into my wrist seal. Take your stuff and leave my family's shop. I smiled as I caught both. Oh, so that bombshell to be is your daughter. Nice to know, see you again soon, Tenten-chan. Out. He rushed around and smiled at the completely red girl looking at me. I jumped to the door dodging a grab and kicked it open before running down the road. I could hear the man after me. Don't come near my daughter again, you damn Uzumaki playboy. I laughed as I ran, knowing I could get away whenever I wanted. Bird Pav. Naruto, having lost the enraged father. He walked into the classroom humming as he walked to the front and smiled, seeing Hinata and Ino waiting for him holding a seat. Naruto was Yui having a quiet fight with Sasuke in the back. He saw Sasuke pull his hand back like he was about to strike Yui. Frowning as he looked at him, Naruto used Zoro and was behind Sasuke and grabbed his forearm. Naruto grabbed the back of Sasuke's shorts and pulled Sasuke up onto his totes, and you could tell his balls were being crushed by his own weight. Naruto walked him back to his seat like a whipped puppy. Sit down and shut up, you disgrace. Naruto forced Sasuke to sit down before grabbing the back of Sasuke's head and slamming him face first into the desk. Naruto huffed as he looked down at the knocked out fool he'd once again put in his place. Naruto let his hair go, then walked back down at the laughing Hinata and Ino. Yui walked down behind Naruto, a smile on her face as she sat down behind Naruto. Naruto sealed his swords away and Hinata smiled as she laid her head on Naruto's shoulder. She wrapped her arm around Naruto's and sighed as she held onto him. Ino leaned into Naruto's other side, happy to feel the warmth of Naruto's body. As the class started, Naruto's thoughts drifted back to Anko. They'd been fucking for a month now and he wasn't sure what that made them now. Naruto, pay attention. Naruto caught the eraser Iruka threw at him. Ino groaned as she had to move for Naruto to catch the eraser. Iruka sighed before Naruto flicked his wrist. Iruka caught the eraser before turning back around and talking again. Like I was saying. We will be using Toddy in an hour to practice our weapons throwing and to jutsu when giving each of you a chance to show a jutsu you may have learned. And someone wake Sasuke up again. Iruka sighed before talking low, but not enough to stop a few in the front row from hearing. I swear he just needs to leave Naruto alone, he's never going to learn. Naruto smiled at that and Hinata laughed a little as Ino smirked. Naruto laughed a little before he went back to his thoughts about Anko. She came off like for was mad but could be so loving when she wanted to be. She had a soft side to her at times, almost gentle. Naruto's listened to Iruka waiting for lunch. But Anko. Anko sat at her desk, sipping some green tea as she read over the information she'd gotten out of one of the spies from Iowa. Anko sighed as she set the paper down and elbow on the table and rested her chin on her hand. Her mind drifted to Naruto and the last 2 nights. She smiled as her other hand idly moved to her lower stomach where Naruto had placed the seal. She wondered what the future held for her if everything went like she hoped. Anko. Anko jumped as she looked up and saw Shanks at her door, a smile on his face. Anko was shocked to see Shanks. Shanks walked into the room and sat down in the chair across from Anko. Anko smiled as she looked at him and noticed something was happening with Shanks' missing arm. What's going on with that arm, Shanks? Shanks smiled before rolling the sleeve up and showing some arm bandages. Tsunade wanted to remove the scar tissue from the burns. With what's going to happen in the next few months. Now, I heard you and Ibiki broke that ninja I caught. I want to know what he gave up. I have the Hokage's seal to let you know I'm cleared to hear everything. Anko nodded, then held her hand out to Shanks. He quickly pulled out a small scroll and handed it over to Anko. She quickly broke the wax seal on the small scroll. She opened it and then looked at the contents. To the tea department. From the 3rd Hokage. Sir, Shanks has been granted permission to learn the information gained from the interrogation of the former root shinobi. As the first responding ninja to the Uchiha massacre and as the head of the Uzumaki, he's cleared to know the intel. Side here is in Sarutobi, 3rd Hokage of Konohagakure no Sado. Anko nodded before she stood up from her desk and walked over to the wall. She made a half-tiger sign and flared her chakra. A spot on the wall flashed before a door appeared. Anko opened the door and she was in a room with one of only 8 computers in the building. Anko walked over and quickly typed in her password and ran through a few files and a few more passwords. She had the intel Shanks wanted. She quickly made a copy and printed it off. Anko smiled as she quickly read over the integration notes at the top. Interrogation subject 97,668. It took more than 3 weeks to break through his mental training to resist interrogation. He was, however, broken and given up names as to who was involved and gave up information on plans to retrieve and break the Uzumaki Jinchuriki to be made into a weapon. Anko stopped seeing the word Jinchuriki. She put the strange word aside for now and decided to ask the Hokage. Anko walked back into her office and handed over the paper and he thanked he before he stood and walked out of the office. Anko sighed and hummed as she sat back down in her seat. She looked up at her clock and smiled, seeing that it was lunchtime for the academy. Anko quickly put all the papers away before a knocking came on her door. Her smile widened as she looked at Naruto as he stood there with a bag in hand. Come in and lock then seal the door. Naruto Pav. I smiled as I walked into Anko's office, locked the door, and placed a chakra-blocking seal and a soundproofing seal. I watched Anko stand up as I walked over to her desk and she grabbed my shirt and shoved me into her chair. She took the dango bag and then sat down on my lap. I laughed and wrapped my arms around her waist as she ripped into the bag. I grabbed her hips as she moved around. Oh, you got the really good stuff today. I nodded as she moved back, pressing her ass more into my lap. You really like my ass, don't you? Heard Pav 10 minutes later. Naruto opened the door and walked out with Anko walked out happily chewing on dango, not minding the sore feeling in her legs. They walked over to the window and Naruto opened the window and put a foot on the windowsill. Anko grab on. Doing what Naruto said, she wrapped her arms around his chest. Naruto wrapped an arm around Anko's back and used the Soru to race across the rooftops heading for the school. Anko smiled as she held onto her lover. After a minute, the two landed in the schoolyard scaring the class as they regathered for the sparring and throwing training. Anko laughed as she held Naruto for a second longer than the three girls liked. Ino, Yui, and Hinata walked up to them before Iruka spoke up. Okay, with Naruto back we're all here. And Anko, why are you here and holding on to Naruto? Anko made a good show of trying not to get sick. That stupid high-speed movement flips your stomach. I'd love to see you look fine after being thrown around like that. Iruka seemed to buy it as he spoke. I see, so like the first time a ninja uses a shunshin technique. I remember throwing up the first time I used it. Hinata grimaced and shivered, knowing that feeling well from both techniques. Naruto helped Anko over to the bench and side before resummoning his swords and put both them on his side as well as a pouch and set it on his side. Naruto walked back over and noticed Kiba and Sasuke glaring at him until Kiba smelled the air. Naruto watched as Kiba sniffed the air a few more times before he was called to throw. Not caring if he was found out, Naruto crossed his arms and waited for his turn. The 15 out of 20, good work Kiba. Sasuke, you're up next. Sasuke walked up like he owned the village and his fangirls screamed as they watched Sasuke throw his kunai and shuriken. The 18 out of 20, very good Sasuke. Naruto, you're up. Naruto smiled and reached into his pouch, pulling out one kunai and one shuriken. Hey dope, what are you doing? You need more than one of each. Sasuke frowned as Naruto walked past Sasuke and Kiba but stopped once he was beside the two. I know, but I'm about to do some you two fools can't. Naruto walked up to the like and them both before running through hand signs. Shuriken Shadow Clone Jutsu. The one kunai and shuriken turned into 10 of each and they needed to the target dead center. AA 20 out of 20, incredible work Naruto. Sasuke gritted his teeth and Kiba flashed his fangs before he sniffed again. He looked at Naruto, then his mouth dropped open. Naruto turned and raised an eyebrow as Kiba started to yell. I knew I smelled snakes, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It's coming from you. It's like you were in a damn snake pit. Kiba yelled as he pointed at Naruto. Staying calm while freaking out inside from the look Hinata, Ino and Yui were giving him, Naruto spoke. I've been training with Anko for over a month. You try to not smell like the snakes that cling to you for heat. Oh wait, you always smell like dog butt, so why do you care much? Or is it the fact a woman is near me when they run from you? Laughed roared around Kiba as Naruto turned his back and walked back over to the others. Once Naruto was close, Hinata grabbed onto his arm and pressed her body into Naruto's side. She didn't like that Kiba had made it known something must have happened. Hinata didn't like the fact that another woman could be worming her way into her spot as best friend and her place as his future head wife. Hinata was no fool. She knew Naruto was going to be put in the craw like her mother and father said may happen. Even if there were other Uzumaki in the village, Naruto and Shanks were the last two with ninjas in the village with an incredibly powerful bloodline. Shanks couldn't be made to do it. But, the council could use Naruto's young mind to get more haki users for the village. Yui laughed as she looked at then walked over and grabbed his other arm and pulled it into her smaller C-cup breast. Yui, get away from the dope. Naruto sighed before he turned his head and looked back at the pissed off third Uchiha heir. Naruto remembered the day Yui told him that Mikoto had followed tradition and Yui had beaten Sasuke down, taking the place of the heiress of the Uchiha clan. Sasuke was livid and couldn't expect that he wouldn't be the next clan head. But, he was angry at the fact his sister had all but made it clear Naruto was who she wanted to rebuild the main line. Sasuke hated that more than anything. They all laughed at him for a second before Ino spoke up. Sasuke, you know you should yell at the next clan head like that. Sasuke glared at her and took a step towards her, but stopped when a pressure covered the training area. Iruka and Mizuki felt a shiver go down their spines as they felt the kai in the air. All around them, ninja hopefuls were falling to the ground out cold. Sasuke dropped to his knees along with the other heirs not close to Naruto, and Anko dropped to the ground. The pressure increased as Naruto turned to make Hinata and Yui let him go. Iruka and Mizuki flinched when they saw the blue slit eyes that looked at Sasuke. Take one step towards anyone I'm close to, I dare you. The beating I'll give you will make what happened to your clan look like an angry kid throwing tantrum. Sasuke started to sweat as he tried to look Naruto in the eye. Sasuke backed down, scared as he looked at Naruto. Naruto then looked at Kiba and he saw Akamaru hiding behind Kiba's legs and Kiba looked ready to piss himself as his instinct screamed alpha as Kiba looked away from the eyes that would strike fear into any Inuzuka, their dogs, and even some wolves. Kiba's pride was screaming for him to glare down these challenger to his place in the pack. But his survival instinct screamed loudly for him to turn and run. Naruto glared at Kiba and Kiba froze when he looked Naruto in the eyes. Sit. Kiba did as he was told, shocking everyone who was still awake as they watched Kiba sit, head bowed to Naruto. Naruto huffed before turning away. The pressure on the air gone once he looked away. Haruka was the first to regain his voice. We're going to end class early today. Naruto, you're coming with me, Anko and Mizuki. We're going to see the Hokage. Haruka was doing his best to sound intimating, but he knew just from what happened he knew, even if they tried to fight they'd lose. Haruka knew Anko had been training with Naruto for a few years, so he hoped it would get Naruto to come quietly. Naruto huffed and Anko walked over and put a hand on Naruto's shoulder. Come on Naruto, let's just go and get this over with. Naruto sighed before he wrapped an arm around Anko's shoulder and pulled her tight into his side. Hang on, I'm going full speed this time. Anko made another good show of looking a little scared. They vanished and the ground cracked from the force Naruto used. Hinata tried to follow them, but to her shock, she couldn't. The speed was too great for her eyes to follow. Chapter 9. Naruto Pav. I sat in the Hokage's office and looked at the Hokage as he looked back at me. I'll ask again Naruto. Why did Haruka and Mizuki say your eyes turned into slits? I sighed as the Hokage asked this question again. As I told you, Gigi, I don't know why my eyes do that when I get angry that angry. Gramps seems to have an idea, but he's not willing to talk about it. Gigi looked at me for a minute before he sighed and rubbed his eyes. I'm sorry, Naruto, but I must get your grandfather and Tsunade here. Something I've made hidden from you has to come out now. If you are not told about it now, something worse may happen later if you don't know. I raised an eyebrow before I felt an Anbu leave the room. I leaned back into the seat and crossed my arms as I looked at the old man. As we sat there, I remembered the book I snagged. I resumed the book and smiled as I looked at the orange book. Make Out Tactics Book 1. The old man paled as a black flash appeared beside me. Where did you get that? I jumped at Tusen's voice and turned to look at her. An evil idea came to mind as pervert flashed in my mind. Payback time, you peeping Tom. The toad said I could use this with all the girls around me, haven't read it yet. Sure is a strange name for a book though. Tusen's Kai was coming off in massive waves and I could feel the Anbu from before with a mix of envy and joy. Time to hammer the final nail. Let's see you do your resource from the hospital. I blinked, then spoke again. Actually he did say something about research and something our house. I hummed before she snatched then ripped it in half with her bare hands. Her anger tripled and Gramps was starting to get pissed too. And let hell will fall on you toad fucker. Tsunade showed a sweet smile to us before she disappeared in a puff of smoke and I smiled and laughed. I held up my fingers and counted down from 5. I watched the two start to sweat and when I had a fist, a scream of utter pain rang out through the village. I smiled as I watched both their faces pale as the screams echoed out. You're evil. I hummed as I looked at Gramps. No, I'm a survivor, would you take that beating? Gramps blinked a few times, then nodded as he looked at Gigi. Gigi nodded as they two looked at one another. Then spoke in unison. Good point. Yes. The pervert is getting the beating he's owned. We all jumped before it the yell and I sighed as I knew Anko was hearing the cries of pain. I smiled as I leaned back into the chair. Well, Anko is happy. I smiled and laughed a little as Gigi activated a seal. A second later, I couldn't hear anything from the outside. I hummed as I took a quick glance around and I saw seals carved into the walls with faded chakra ink. I also noticed a second layer of suppression seals under them. Those will be a damn headache if he actives them. Naruto. I looked at Gramps as he spoke up. He had a serious look. I gave him my full attention as I rarely saw that look. Gramps sighed before he tapped the desk a few times. Naruto, things have been kept from you. We wanted you to be old enough and have the power to protect yourself. But it's clear the beast is starting to turn its head again. Naruto, do you know about the 9 tails? I nodded as I looked at Gramps and Gigi took over. Naruto, what you were told about the fox was a lie I had put in place. The 4th Hokage didn't kill the beast as it was made of pure chakra. But, the beast could be sealed away with a powerful enough seal and a young baby to seal the 9 tails into. And the 9 tail can only be sealed into a baby Uzumaki who was only a few hours old, making him a Jinchuriki. Many people learned of it and I tried to stop them by making a law, but it didn't help any. The adults knew and tried to spread it to the younger generation. I felt my stomach drop as I looked at the two. Then I flared my chakra and ripped my shirt off to try to find the seal. Sure enough, a seal started to show on my stomach and I could tell it was easily a master class seal. I started breathing hard as I stared at the seal and all the names the villagers called me made sense. Naruto. I looked up at Gramps as he reached out to me. I gritted my teeth and then threw my arm up, knocking his arm away. I clenched my fist and teeth as I glared at him. You knew. Gramps flinched as I let my haki loose and he looked shocked at the amount as I blasted them with. I knew it was going to put the village on edge, but I didn't care at the moment. You need to calm down before my power comes out. Ignored the voice as I looked at the two but knew it was right. I grabbed my shirt and threw it back on as I got myself back together and turned my back to them. Lord Hokage doesn't call on me again until I'm a ninja and Shanks. I spit his name out and I felt the shock and pain coming off the two in waves. I'm done with your training and you're home. I drew my swords and destroyed the wall, then jumped off the hole. Naruto wait. Third Pav. Naruto rushed across the rooftops, cracking the rooftops as I jumped. He knew he was faster than Shanks even with that fucking fourth jutsu. But, unknown to him, Anko was near the window and Hinata was walking on the street under the Hokage tower. Yui and Ino were having lunch on the roof of the flower shop. The Anbu captain who talked with him saw him come out of the hole in the wall, with Shanks yelling for him to wait. All five started after him, each worried about what had happened. As they all raced across the village, Tsunade came running back to Hokage Tower and saw Shanks just standing there shaking as he looked out to the village. Then she heard what sounded like an expulsion. Tsunade turned and saw a large part of the top of the east gate was destroyed. As she looked, Shanks dropped to his knees, knowing this could happen, but had hoped it wouldn't. Then Naruto. Naruto Pav. I jumped from the last house at the east gate and coated my right leg in haki. Ah. I kicked the top of the gate. Dust flew up and I landed on the top of the gate, breathing heavily as I looked out at the sea of trees in front of me. I felt a lot of people coming my way and I could feel Hinata, Ino, Yui, Anko, and the Anbu from before. I jumped off the broken gate and used Soru to get into the trees wanting to destroy something. I landed and coated both my arms. I jumped at one of the trees and punched through a tree. I grabbed the tree as it started to fall and slammed it into another two trees. It broke as I spun it over my head. I felt the others getting close, but I didn't care as I threw the broken tree away into more trees. Damn it, screw you all. I screamed and coated my leg and kicked a large boulder, breaking it and throwing it away in pieces. I yelled in anger that the fact the man who was the greatest hero of the village had damned me to this fate. I grabbed another tree and ripped it from the ground, then threw the thing in the same direction the others were coming from. Hinata landed first and jumped away as I grabbed a small about the size of a table. I ripped it out of the ground and then chucked the damn thing through the forest. It broke down trees as it flew in the air until it slammed into a cliff wall. I sighed as I looked at the damage I'd done to the forest. Then Naruto-kun. I turned my head and looked at Hinata out of the corner of my eye. She jumped as she looked at me and turned back to the destruction. Leave all of you. My voice sounded darker as I let my haki fade away. What happened in there, Naruto? I looked back at Anko. That old bastard and Shanks knew why I was hated. They knew why I had to find food and clothes in the trash before Gramps showed up. You had to what? Yui and Hinata yelled and Ino and Anko looked ready to kill someone. I looked back at the damage I'd done. A year before I met you, I was kicked out of the orphanage. I spent 9 months on the street being attacked by other ninjas and civilians. I didn't understand it at the time. Why was I being attacked by the people and shinobi of this village? And the things that yelled as they chased me around. Fox demon, killer, murderer, devil child. I clenched my fist before 2 sets of arms wrapped around me. I looked down and saw it was Yui's and Ino's arms. I threw my arms up, making them let me go. I grabbed my swords as I felt the Anbu surround us, with Tsunade not too far away, Gramps hot on her heels. We're surrounded. I nodded at Anko's voice and used my thumbs to play with the guard of Shusui. Yep, Anbu, Tsunade, and Gramps are coming too. You 4 have a choice to make: stay here and learn the truth or leave like I'm going to leave the Uzumaki home. What? Hinata yelled as I heard 2 sets of feet land behind us. I hummed before Gramps spoke up. Naruto, I know you're upset, but please you have to understand. I clicked my thumb up, shutting Gramps up at the sound. I don't care all this time, and you hid that from me. I'm done with both the Hokage and you Shanks. Naruto, look your anger, you have the right to be but nothing, Tsunade. I turned and glared at the 2 before I clicked Shushi back into its sheath. I sensed the Anbu around us getting ready. If I decide it's worth it, I'll spec with you all later. Third Pav. Yui reached out for Naruto before he vanished and 2 Anbu slammed down to the ground. Both their masks smashed in and shadows followed after Naruto as he made his way deeper into the forest. Fast behind them all was Anko, Ino, Yui, and Hinata. Shanks and Tsunade frowned as watched this. They knew it could have gone bad, but they'd hoped he'd take it better. After a minute, Shanks and Tsunade were after them. I growled as I felt the others closing in on him, Hinata leading the pack. Use the Soru and get low into the forest. I used to run around these forests before I was sealed. One of my old caves is nearby. I can also hide you from Hinata's eyes for a little while. But your Gramps haki will still be able to find us. I frowned hearing that but did like the strange soft voice idea. Dealing with just Gramps and Tsunade would be much easier. I jumped off another branch and smiled as I used Sour. I landed and then was covered in a mess of red chakra. It felt like I was being held in hot water but not burning. I felt them all overshot me and I smiled as I looked around and smiled as I saw a small cave. I held my swords and jumped into the cave. I landed in the middle of a large cavern and sent out a blast of haki. I knew it would bring Gramps down on me faster, but I wanted him here this time. I jumped up and stick to the cave ceiling and waited. Chapter 10. Hey everyone, Shinobi of Haki update is here. My pot free on the page will always have new early reading chapters like my other stories. For anyone wanting to read the chapters early, please look up my account SWORDKING24, link in my profile. Third Pav. Shanks and Tsunade rushed into the cave, both at the ready. Shank looked around, worried about what Naruto may be trying to do. Shanks hadn't seen Naruto this angry and his deliberate blast of haki. Shanks knew Naruto wanted him here and he'd given the others the slip to get him there. Shanks drew his sword, knowing something was going on. Shanks pulled his sword up, blocking a strike from Naruto as he fell from the cave roof. Naruto kicked Shanks' arm and flew back into the dark cave. Naruto. Shanks and Tsunade heard Naruto jumping around in the darkness. They put their backs together and tried to look into the dark. Shanks knew he'd explained his full range of haki abilities and how his future sight worked. Naruto also knew how Swan's super strength worked in her medical jutsu. Shanks cursed under his breath at the fact Naruto was faster than him and wished he'd taken this better. So, want to tell me why you hid that from me? Tsunade and Shanks looked around, trying to find where Naruto's voice came from. You know, thinking about it all makes sense now that I think about it all. My insane ability to heal and never scar. How no matter how much work I do, I never get exhausted. How my chakra never seems to run out. Shanks tried to use his observation to see where Naruto would come from. Naruto smiled as he unsheathed Emna and pulled Emna and Shusui over his right shoulder. Well, my guess is you both are hiding other things from me. I want answers, or I'll use force to get them from you or the old monkey. Shanks was afraid of this and quickly used his haki to feel for any other people around him. He felt Naruto above his moving around and staying in one spot for too long. Blade Storm. Shanks grabbed Tsunade and jumped away as a stream of wind-enhanced chakra crashed down where they were a moment ago. The stone where they stood was busted open, causing cracks all along the floor. Shanks grabbed Tsunade and jumped out of the cave as another attack followed them. Naruto jumped out after them. His blue eyes were blood red. Shanks and Tsunade looked at him and saw that his eyes and whisker marks were much darker. His swords had a red glow around them. The glow moved in waves, and Shanks was shocked to see waves of haki coming from him. Get the fuck away. Naruto let out a blast of Conqueror's haki. Shanks and Tsunade both jumped away, knowing how dangerous this was. They landed a good 100 feet away, but they could feel the hate and evil coming from him. As they looked at him, they saw some dark red energy under his shirt. Naruto. Shanks cursed as Hinata and the others landed near Naruto. The Anbu landed around him, swords drawn. Naruto narrowed his eyes as his mind clouded with rage. Naruto looked around, looking for the weakest Anbu, knowing he'd have to fight his way out. Once, he thought he saw the weakest, a set of arms wrapped around his chest. Not restraining him but holding him, and he saw it was Anko's arms. Naruto, please, this isn't you. Naruto took a few more ragged breaths before he felt his haki and whatever the fox was doing fading. Shanks was happy to see the haki aura fading away from Naruto's swords. But, when Shanks saw his eyes, all he saw was hate. Naruto spit at him before he shook Anko, making her look hurt from the action. Naruto glared at Shanks and spoke with an edge to his tone. Don't ever come near me again. All the girls looked at Naruto before he jumped away. All the girls looked at Shanks and Tsunade while the Anbu rushed off after Naruto. Hinata looked at Shanks and she narrowed her eyes at him. Tell me what is going on. Shanks frowned and then nodded his head as he looked at her. I'm sorry, but only Naruto or the Hokage can tell you. But, I will say that Naruto was just told something that will change his life forever. Hinata frowned before she turned and jumped off after all the girls following. But Naruto. Naruto raced through the trees, his head full of thoughts. He was angry that the people he trusted knew why the villagers hated him. They knew, Hiruzen knew, and let it all happen. Naruto jumped hard off a large branch, breaking it as he flew across the forest. Naruto could feel the Anbu trying to keep up with him as he outraced them. Hey kid, why don't we just leave? Naruto heard that voice again as he just jumped around the trees. And where would I go? Naruto jumped up, dodging an Anbu who tried to grab him from behind. Naruto jumped onto the top of the trees and dashed across them. Do you really think that they will just let you roam around as you like after this? You've proven that you could just leave if you wanted to and take down Anbu if need be. Even if we did stay, this ninja will never let you reach your full potential. Naruto didn't respond, knowing the fox was right. Hiruzen may be willing to let it go, but the clan heads and the civilian councils would try and force him to stay in line. Oh, I just had an idea, kid. Naruto jumped down onto a river and started to run on the water. What? Naruto heard a soft laugh as Naruto jumped to the side and slid on the water. When he stopped, the last 3 Anbu landed around him. Let's see what happens if they would understand that they should fear you more than they hate you. Naruto, his mind was still clouded with hate, made him smile. I think you're right. They may think I'm acting like a brat, but who in this village had been beaten, burned, poisoned, and stabbed at 4? I think it's past time they learn to fear me for a reason. Naruto got ready to fight, and the Anbu were shocked. Many Anbu respected Naruto and didn't want to fight him. Naruto clenched his fist, which turned red and faded back to a shiny black. He raised his fist as he looked at them. Come on then. You 3 aren't taking me back without me being bloody and beaten. The Anbu all frowned under their masks before they decided that Naruto was right. They would have to take him back by force. A cat-masked woman spoke as she drew her sword. Fine, if you want it this way, Naruto. The 3 jumped at Naruto, and he jumped at them. Get away from my Naruto. Naruto looked up as Anko and Hinata came down with Ino and Yui close behind. Naruto smiled to see at least 4 people who had always known him as him. Naruto took the woman with a sword as Hinata landed on a crow-masked man, while Anko tackled a man with a bird mask. We got this, Naruto. Naruto saw Yui and Ino launching a long-range attack, keeping back an Anbu Naruto hadn't noticed. Naruto smiled as he looked at the cat and sidestepped her sword's backswing. Naruto blocked the back of her blade with his haki-covered fist. With his mind set on causing some pain, Naruto quickly landed a powerful punch to her stomach. Cat nearly dropped her sword, not expecting him to have such a strong punch. Naruto, seeing she was stunned for a second, threw a hard punch straight into her chest, forcing the breath from her body. Naruto kicked her back into the tree line, sure she'd be down for at least a minute. Ah! Naruto's head turned fast and saw Anko holding a wound to her thigh. Naruto saw a bloody kunai in his hand. Getting angrier, jumped at him while his back was turned. Naruto wrapped his hands around his throat and threw his knee into his spine. As he did, Naruto forced him to bend backward and his knee forced his spine to bend beyond its limits. Naruto had a dark smile as he felt his spine give as he screamed and fell into the water. Naruto then threw himself up into the air and saw Hinata had beaten her Anbu. Naruto smiled as he came down on the Anbu Yui and Ino were struggling to deal with. Naruto grabbed the back of her head and slammed her face first into the ground. Naruto quickly jerked her back and slammed a haki fist into her masked face. Her mask shattered as she flew back into a tree. Naruto stood there before Anko and Hinata were quickly at his side with Yui and Ino in front of him. Anko, ignoring her wound, grabbed Naruto's face and forced him to look at her. What is going on? Naruto's smile dropped and he frowned as Shanks and Tsunade dropped down behind him. But he decided he didn't give a damn right now. He looked her in the eyes and spoke with a lie he knew would piss them off. The 4th Hokage used me as a baby as a human sacrifice to seal the 9-tailed fox to be used as a scapegoat for the village to focus its anger on. Everyone but the kids knew. Until the Shanks came, they tried to kill me every day by beatings, burning a few times, and weapons. Shanks and Tsunade paled at that. Naruto had told them, and to make it worse, he had told them about the strongest heiresses of the village, who were all devoted to him. Of the girls looked at him, shocked, before a pissed off looked over and took Hinata's face quickly, followed by the others. Anko glared over at the 2 older ninjas and the flinched. Tsunade saw the look of a woman who saw her loved one harmed. Tsunade knew all these girls would be looking for someone to hurt. That bastard used a baby to seal a demon. Shanks, seeing this going back fast, tried to spec. Please, I know what Minato did was wrong, but he had to protect his village. His last wish was for Naruto to be seen as a hero. Hinata glared at him and took a step toward him. Oh, and did the villagers listen to that wish? And you? You're his grandfather and godmother. Where were you 2 when he needed you the most? Shanks and Tsunade looked away, both knowing she had a point. As Hinata was about to charge them, she was stopped by Naruto's hand on her shoulder. She looked back at him and he nodded his head. You need to stop. No. You 4 still have the choice to go back to your normal lives. Everyone still awake understood what he meant as soon as he said it. Hearing that, Hinata started to panic, threw Anko to the side, and grabbed Naruto's shirt. No. Naruto smiled before he let loose a blast of wave of his conqueror's haki. In an instant, all the girls were falling to the ground out cold. Naruto made clones without a hand sign to catch each of them. They lowered them to the ground and then he looked over to see Shanks holding Tsunade up. Naruto wasn't surprised to see the strong-willed woman still awake. Naruto sighed before he turned back to them before he spoke to them. Shanks and Tsunade looked at his back. Me and my clone will take them back to their families. Once that's done, I'll find my own place since I don't to see your faces for a while. Shanks, seeing this may be his last chance to talk to Naruto before he is too far gone, speaks up. Naruto, please. You have to understand we wanted you to be old enough and strong enough to handle what was to come after. We didn't tell you everything before you exited the Hokage's tower. Naruto Minato picked you to hold the 9 tails as he knew you could handle the beast. Naruto turned and looked at Shanks with a look at could kill. I don't care about why he did it or why I was the one he picked. Seeing as my mother let him take me, I once again say I cut my ties to the Uzumaki clan and renounced my heirship to the clan. Shanks, panicking, reached for Naruto as Tsunade stood on her own. Naruto, please, you don't understand. Naruto vanished in a burst of speed, his clones following with the girls. Shanks dropped as he felt Naruto get out of his scenery range. Shanks looked down as the last of his direct blood family had abandoned him. He's renounced his family, something no Uzumaki had done in the last century. Shanks hung his head as Tsunade got on her knees and hugged him, trying not to cry, knowing the pain Shanks would suffer until Naruto was willing to listen. 2 hours later. Naruto sat on the wall of Konoha staring out at the forest with Anbu surrounding him with Hiruzen standing behind him. Naruto wasn't going to look at Hiruzen. He'd lost all respect for the man he once saw as a grandfather. Naruto. Naruto ignored Hiruzen as he spoke to him. He heard him sigh as he felt him move closer to him before he moved and sat at Naruto's right side. Hiruzen's face was blocked by his hat and the side fabric. Naruto looked at him out of the corner of his eye before he looked back at the forest. Naruto, you don't have to respond. You can just listen to me. If you don't want to listen, then just stand up and you're free to leave anytime you like. Naruto decided that he at least would hear him out before he decided what he would do. Hiruzen waited to see if Naruto was going to move. When he didn't, Hiruzen smiled as he saw that Naruto would at least hear him out now. Thank you for listening to me, Naruto. I know you may hate us now, but I hope you understand why I couldn't tell you while you were younger. We couldn't risk you snapping and letting the beast gain control of you. I know I didn't truly stepping and left out to the wolves, but you have to understand I had to put the village first like the fourth did. Naruto stood up and Hiruzen realized that bringing up Minato was the worst thing he could do. Hiruzen turned to try and say something to stop him, but saw Naruto enter the village by jumping over the side of the wall. Hiruzen sighed before he looked back out to the forest, wishing this day hadn't gone like it had. But Naruto that night. Naruto sat on a park bench at sunset, his swords resting at his side. Naruto was looking up at the sky as it started to fill with stars. There you are, Naruto. Naruto looked over and Vespera was walking up to him and behind her was a man Naruto was sure he'd seen before. Fit and relatively tall shinobi with fair-skinned, tall, spiky white hair and dark eyes with the left one covered by his headband. Naruto picked Vespera and sat her down on his lap as he looked at the man. Naruto laughed before looking back up as the stars were coming out now. Hey dog. The man looked at Naruto for a second before he laughed a little before he walked over and sat down beside him. Naruto looked at him and he smiled before he spoke again. The Hokage Shanks send you here. The man nodded before he spoke. No, I'm the man who requested you, Hinata and Yui for his genin team earlier today. I was told you three were mine, so I've come to find my future students. Call me Kakashi-sensei. Naruto hummed and laughed as he looked at the man. Well, damn, I guess my little episode is going to keep me on a short leash for a while at Kakashi-sensei. Kakashi smiled as he knew he'd let Naruto do what he wanted as long as keep his teammate safe. What if Naruto was haki user in One Piece? End here and thanks for watching my video till the end.